Welcome to Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada, where we take a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge, and solutions, and that's what we are all about here at Truehope Canada. And Truehope Canada is a mind and body-based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. We have another special episode of Truehope Cast for you today. Lawyer Shawn, Buckley and VP of Truehope Canada, Mr. David Stephan, are going to be discussing the vital integrity issue within the natural health industry. With everything that is happening with Bill C-47, we see some companies stepping up and stepping out and making a stand, but we also see other companies sitting back into the shadows and waiting for the storm to pass. But if you have any knowledge of this bill and what is going on within the natural health industry within Canada, you know that storm is not going to pass without grit, fight, and determination from everybody in the industry. So I encourage you to share this episode, like it, comment, give us a rating on Spotify and iTunes if you can. But other than that, enjoy the show.
Welcome. We are back on to discuss issues surrounding the natural health industry. Now, over the past 3 decades, there has been many attempts to try to dismantle and to control and to prevent natural health products from being available to the Canadian public. And today, things are even worse than we could have ever thought that they would have gotten, but in such a short period of time, where literally the wolf is on our doorstep. Harm has not yet fully taken place in relation to the new things that have been put into place by Health Canada, which we are going to be talking about. And we are going to be basically the purpose of this podcast today, which is, by the way, the 130th edition or episode of Truehope Cast, which is the official podcast for Truehope Canada. The reason why I'm bringing that forward is that some people will be viewing this today through that venue, but some of you are viewing this through the channel of nhppa.org. Some of you are going to be viewing it on my personal Facebook page as well. So just so you're aware, this is going out to multiple streams, and we are going to be bringing forward the issues that are at our doorstep with also action plans that can be put into place to prevent this overall issue from basically preventing you as a Canadian from having access to life-saving and therapeutic natural health products that the majority of Canadians rely on a daily basis. So as part of this, again, we are bringing on Shawn Buckley. He's a constitutional lawyer. He has had a long journey in relation to natural health products. He has a phenomenal story, and we're going to get him to touch on that in relation to how he first came on the scene when it comes to natural health products, going back over 30 years ago. And we're going to talk about that, or maybe it's just under 30 years ago. We'll have him clarify that. So we're going to bring him on, and then we're going to get into the issues surrounding this. We're going to be talking about the different elements that Health Canada is moving forward with that is going to ultimately harm your ability or prevent your ability from getting natural health products. We're going to be talking about the psychology behind it and the response that Canadians will naturally have. Many Canadians will. And as well as talking about the integrity of the natural health industry and why some companies are getting involved in this to alert you to these issues and why others are remaining silent. So without further ado, we're going to bring Shawn Buckley on. Hey, good morning, Shawn.
Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you again for taking the time to be on. Many of my followers personally will recognize you, as we've had this long journey together, even on a personal level over the last 10 years in relation to other court matters. Others will recognize you from you representing Truehope almost 20 years ago. It was.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's that long, isn't it? So, but I'm trying to remember, like that criminal trial. I think it was like early 2000s.
It really started in 2003 when Health Canada came in and shut everything off at the border for the 3,000 Canadians that were using our products at the time. And then they came in and raided us at gunpoint. And I think you got involved shortly thereafter. And then I think it went, I think the decision was in 2006.
You know, I thought it was a little earlier than that, but in any event, it was a long time ago.
Well,
So
I can say this much: it was a long time ago, but you don't seem to be aging. So we'll talk
yeah,
about
well,
that after as to what your secret is there.
it's the EM Power Plus. So
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on. Just for the viewers, I was on a meeting with you not that long ago where you kind of, I believe it's a meeting or a podcast. I don't think it was the last podcast that me and you were on, but I watched you where you were talking about your history, which was really quite compelling as to how you got involved in any of this in relation to health products, Health Canada. So if you don't mind, can you,
well, sure. And I like to tell the story because we're going to be talking about kind of how Health Canada right now is maneuvering to take natural products away. And the story helps drive home actually how this is a life and death issue. So the paradox is the government saying we need stricter regulations to protect you. But the reality is the opposite. It's going to lead to death and it's going to lead to harm. And our current halfway point to the drug regulations that we're in now has already led to death and harm. So yeah, it's back in 1994. I'm working at a firm, and Health Canada hires that firm to defend itself against a lawsuit that was brought by a herbalist named Jim Strauss. So Jim Strauss was a herbalist in Kamloops, and he was importing herbs from the United States that were perfectly legal for anyone to import. But Health Canada is trying to shut this fellow down and actually, would refer to me as their counsel as a rogue herbalist. And what they explained to me, and I'll just say that my background, I grew up in a family, you got sick, you went to the medical doctor. And the idea of, natural health products, other than vitamins being a good idea, was not very meaningful. And, I don't even remember now, but, likely I was on 0 supplements. In fact, not likely, I would have been taking no vitamins, nothing. That just was not part of my world. And Health Canada is explaining to me that this rogue herbalist is actually, and if you can believe this, David, actually selling unapproved treatments on the market. And is this ever dangerous? Because they're unapproved. They have not been approved of by Health Canada. And I saw that you were smiling there. Your audience should know, and I didn't know at the time, that basically there wasn't a single approved natural product in Canada, because we have the Food and Drug Act, and we have drug regulations, but they were written for chemical drugs, which is a total different ball game than garlic extract or oregano oil or vitamins and minerals. Like when you create a novel chemical and you introduce it to the human body, we've learned that that's one of the most dangerous things you can do. 3 of our top 5 leading causes of death, although 2 of them are hidden from the public, you can dig for them and find them, are related to chemical pharmaceutical drugs. So it's one of our biggest risk factors. In fact, for every age group, I think, 10-year age groups, except for one in Canada, your biggest risk is going to the doctor's office.
I want to touch on that real quick. I want to throw out some numbers because this is a matter that I had to deal with a number of years back when I had people coming at me. Media was attacking me for being on the speaking circuit for all these different health shows across Canada. And they were basically saying, who are you to be even speaking about matters of health? You've got no credentials. Well, okay. Well, take a look at the experience, take a look at, where we come from. And the numbers speak for themselves in relation to how many people get better, compared to going to the doctor's office. But these numbers were coming out, and in relation to iatrogenic deaths, I had to do a bunch of digging. And what was interesting is, Canada has about 1/10 the population the US does. And the numbers mirror perfectly in relation to the deaths surrounding properly prescribed medications, which is 100,000 people per year in the US are dying due to properly prescribed medications. They're taking
as prescribed.
Yeah, and they're dying. 10,000 in Canada. And then in relation to medical mishap, which was obviously a large theme in relation to the trials that you and I were involved in from 2014, actually, all the way up till last year. Medical mishap, 300,000 people per year in the US are dying from medical misadventure or medical mistakes. And that's only what's being reported. Because, how often is a doctor actually going to report, oh, I caused the death, right? So it's definitely underreported, but 300,000 in the US, 30,000 in Canada. You group them together, and you basically, between Canada and the US, you've got almost 500,000 people every year dying because of going to the hospital and taking the medications that they're prescribing. But sorry, go ahead.
When you're talking deaths, you're not even talking injury.
No, not talking injury, just solely death.
Yeah. So, so I didn't understand that the chemical drug regulations weren't applicable. They weren't designed for natural products. So in fact, you couldn't get through the drug approval process. And so basically every single natural product was technically illegal. Now, there were some exceptions. You had some multivites and stuff like that had drug identification numbers. There were like vitamin monographs and the like. And there actually had been a very short period of time where Health Canada like totally loosened up on DINs for natural products. And there were still some of those legacy ones on there. But for all intents and purposes, if you walked into a health food store back in 1994, you would be hard pressed to find a technically legal product. So they were completely unregulated. And it's funny, we're in a campaign and I'm being told, don't use the word unregulated, but we were completely unregulated. The whole industry was. And so Health Canada is telling me back in 94, well, can you imagine this herbalist is selling an unapproved treatments? It isn't even dawning on me. Well, wait a second. They're all unapproved. You can't get approval. What are we talking about? But their point is he was treating heart disease, a very serious life and death condition, with an unapproved treatment. And this was dangerous because people can die, or their condition can get worse because they're not getting the approved treatments, right? And, I'm drinking that Kool-Aid and I'm buying that story, and I go to court and I have the lawsuit dismissed because he was suing in the wrong court. So then I start my own firm, and in another effort to shut this herbalist Jim Strauss down, the province charges him with practicing medicine without a license, because the act that gives the doctors their medical monopoly says only doctors can practice medicine, and it defines the practice of medicine as including treatment claims. And Jim was quite religious about saying he could cure heart disease. He literally drove around in a white van covered in red letters, on the side, "We cure heart disease." Like he could not be quiet about it. And I'll share why he couldn't is, so he, first of all, you have to understand he was an older gentleman. So he flew for the German Air Force in World War II. He was from Austria, and his family had been traditional healers for 4 centuries. And he was trained by his grandparents. So he was trained to be a traditional healer by, a family with 4 centuries of expertise in traditional healing. He was an expert. Like you can't be trained like that anymore. Like it's interesting, David, like when we went into this halfway drug model of the natural health product regulations, Strauss Herb Company was beside themselves at how poor, like how the quality of their heart drops was going to drop so much, because under the natural health product regulations, you'll have an active ingredient in one of your herbs, and you will test that batch of herbs for the strength of the active ingredient and then adjust your formula based on the strength. Well, before the natural health product regulations, when you're a master herbalist trained in the ancient traditions, you do it by taste. You taste the herbs. and your taste is more than just that active ingredient, because there's more than, like, there's so many things going on that is, there's not just one active ingredient, and they work in synergy, and somebody trained in tasting for strength makes a better product than somebody relying on a lab test.
Right.
And they literally were grieving that their product is so much worse under these regulations than it was before the regulations. It's still good. They still work,
Right.
but it's not
I
as
actually, I
not as
know,
good.
and that's unfortunate. And because I've never used the stuff pre-regulations, but I personally use the stuff. I love it. It tastes phenomenal. I think,
Well, the cinnamon helps. The cinnamon helps.
I don't
So
get the cinnamon version. The garlic and cayenne, but I know personally, I don't have heart issues or anything like that, but it's great for cardiovascular health. But I know a lot of people that it has actually saved their lives
well,
with the post product. So it's still good, but that's interesting to hear that it was basically dumbed down.
oh, it was better. They made it clear to me it was better before they were forced to follow these regulations. And if you're going to treat them like chemical drugs, that part of the regulations, and for people that don't have that training, you can understand the rationale, but it's just an example of how, and our regulations are not well intentioned, but um, just how things aren't always how they seem. But I'll get back to the story. So he's charged with practicing medicine without a license. He hires me to defend him. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, this is it.
No, hold on. So at this point in time, so at one point in time, you were working on behalf of Health Canada to
Yeah.
try to take him down. Now he's hiring you, and you're moving over from the dark side to the light side. Is that
Yeah. Well, and it's actually the only reason I can talk about the Health Canada experience is I had to get their permission to waive solicitor-client privilege to act for him, and they thought it would be a good idea because maybe I could talk some sense into him or calm him down or whatever. So that's why I can talk about them saying he was a rogue herbalist and stuff like that. Is they actually waived solicitor-client privilege so that I could act for him. And they would have saw no downside in that. I mean, he's going to hire a lawyer. Why not this guy that can talk some sense into him? And there's always two sides to a story. And I learned the other side when I was acting for Jim. So I've got an awful case. Like on the facts, I've got a guy who can't stop talking about curing heart disease, and the law says he can't do that because he's not a doctor. So I have to attack the law as being unconstitutional. We have freedom of expression in Section 2B of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And back then, the charter used to mean something, like courts would actually follow it back then, pre-COVID. So, and the law was really strong on protecting speech, but I had a narrative problem. And the narrative problem is if Health Canada if the judge accepted Health Canada's narrative that here we've got a rogue herbalist selling unapproved treatments, and especially for heart disease, and so actually people could die or be seriously injured by delaying getting proper treatment, then the judge isn't going to want to find in my favor, even though the law's on our side. Like that law restricted speech. Case law's on my side, but put yourself in the judge's shoes. If you think your decision is actually going to lead to death and harm, you're really not going to want to make that decision, even though the law says you should. I mean, it's just basic psychology. So I had to make sure the judge didn't accept that narrative. But much like in the Truehope case, we had to give the judge a different narrative than Health Canada was presenting, right? So same thing. So I go to Jim's shop. It was called Natural Way Herbs. It was literally this teeny little herb shop that, total mom and pop shop with bottles of herbs everywhere. And you actually smelled of herbs if you spent like half an hour there. Like it's just the aroma was everywhere. This was a working herbalist shop. And so I go to his shop and I'm explaining the problem to him and saying, Jim, is there any way we can, show that your heart drops work, that you're telling the truth. Like, I mean, there's not going to be any clinical evidence. I know his story, but it could be a little self-serving, right? And I guess I need to finish his story. So I've explained to your audience how he was trained by his grandparents, who were master herbalists with 4 centuries of expertise behind him. Well, he wasn't interested in that at all. He got a PhD in electrical engineering and was working for BC Hydro as an engineer, and he has a heart attack. And he's rushed by ambulance to the hospital, and they do an angiogram, and he's got one artery 100% blocked, another 80% blocked. And they tell him, Jim, you need a double bypass surgery if you're going to survive. And he didn't like that idea, so he checks himself out of the hospital. He makes the heart drops. He treats his heart disease. And, it's interesting. He said the difficulty wasn't figuring out how to dissolve plaque in your arteries. That's the easy part. The difficulty is how to do it slowly, right? He says that's what he had to work on, not how do we clean this out? How do we do it slow enough that we're not creating any problems?
Right.
So he makes his heart drops. He treats himself. He gets well. He never has a bypass surgery. He lived at least another 30 years and died in an old folks home. He did not die of heart disease. So, and then he decides, transformation experience, I've got to sell these. So he quits his job, starts selling these heart drops. He sells a whole bunch of other remedies. Now he's in the family business. And so I'm there, and I'm talking to Jim because I want to, is there some way we can prove you're telling the truth? Like, I know your story and you can tell your story, but a judge is going to think that's a little self-serving, even though it's true. And we'll have the angiogram and all of that. And he thinks for a minute, and then he goes into the back and he brings me out a box, and then another box, and then another box. All I remember today is it was either 3 or 5, like it was an odd number. And these boxes are all filled with letters. And they're all the same. Like, so literally thousands and thousands of letters, all saying I had heart disease, I took your heart drops, I got well, God bless you. Like, so these are people, like, think about this. He's not asking people to write him letters, David. These are people that just feel compelled to write letters. Now, those letters are pure hearsay. I cannot enter a single one as evidence in court, but I can call the authors of those letters. I put them on the stand to swear to tell the truth, and then they can tell the truth. And that's the highest level of evidence in court. And so I start phoning these people. And on the day of trial, I had 5 middle-class professional witnesses, and I cherry-picked middle-class professionals because the judge is a middle-class professional. So these are the judge's people. And for credibility reasons, I wanted that. They had all had heart disease. They had all had at least 1 open heart bypass surgery. One had had 2. They all continued to have heart disease because the reasons their arteries were plugging up was not being addressed. They all needed another bypass surgery to survive. 2 of them were too weak to survive the surgery, so the doctor sent them home to die. And the other 3 were not willing to go through another surgery just to buy a year or 2 more of life, because it was just, that's not going to be quality of life. I'm basically going to recover from this operation and then die. So for them, the approved treatments that Health Canada wants to limit everyone to is a dead-end death sentence. Full stop. No ifs, buts, ors. The approved treatments are death sentence. And here's where, from a legal philosophical perspective, this gets interesting, is if we put ourselves in a situation where we allow the government to say you can only take treatments we approve of, even though you are a mature, consenting, rational adult, and all the approved treatments are a death sentence for you. This is where we are in Canada. There's something just doesn't sit right with me with that proposition. I mean, even before we get to the point where none of the approved treatments are going to work for you, I mean, just this idea that you cannot choose to treat your body the way you like, that basically the government has the right to say, no, only these treatments are available. That's a really interesting legal position to be in. And the game Health Canada plays is it's like the war on hard drugs. Is the idea is well, if we can stamp out anyone who's making an unapproved treatment, then it doesn't matter that people want to access unapproved treatments. They can't, because we've stamped them out. That's the strategy that they take. And I can tell you it's largely effective.
It's a form of servitude or slavery, really.
Oh, well, it truly is. And our, we can go into it later if you want, but I think I need to finish this story. That, our food and drug laws are not there for health. They're there to protect intellectual property rights, which is a financial interest. Mm-hmm. So, but back to the Jim Strauss story. So for these 5 professional middle-class witnesses, the approved treatments are a death sentence for them. It's a dead end. So they're now looking outside of the approved treatments. They come across these heart drops. They all get well. David, at the time of trial, they were all working full time. They had been disabled. One of them had been disabled over a decade. Like, we're talking on disability insurance, CPP disability. These are people that have been disabled for years because of their heart disease, walking around with their nitroglycerin. And they're working full time at the time of trial. You can't fake that stuff. And so that was kind of my road to Damascus conversion experience. Whereas before, when I was working for Health Canada against Jim Strauss, my belief was the danger was allowing mature, competent Canadian adults the right to choose how they're going to treat themselves. And we certainly can't allow them to take a treatment that Health Canada doesn't approve of, because government knows best. That was my belief. I totally drank that Kool-Aid. I fully believed it. And the majority of, a large number of Canadians would buy that narrative because they have not taken the time to sit down and think it through, or they have not been in the position themselves or somebody close to them where the approved treatments were a death sentence. And then they discover an unapproved treatment that saves their life or transforms their standard of living. Those people, they don't buy this narrative at all. But it's a rational narrative if you don't understand the problems. But after I prepared for that trial, the truth was that unapproved treatment, that single natural health product, the danger wasn't leaving it on the market. The danger was taking it off the market. And at that time, I could have given you the names, addresses, and phone numbers of thousands of Canadians that were only alive because of that natural health product. We're not, and the standard of living. I mean, you go from being disabled to working full time. And what percentage of people who go through an experience like that actually write you a letter?
They would only,
Lord knows, but I mean, I've never written a letter to a company that's helped me out.
If we're talking statistically, about 1 in 10. That's about it.
Yeah. So now Health Canada would tell us that product needs to be taken off the market because it's unapproved, and that this is for your safety. But Health Canada, when they're saying something is dangerous, meaning a natural health product is dangerous, and they're running around like Chicken Little right now. The sky's falling. You're in so much danger. We need stricter regulations. They never do a balanced risk analysis, because a balanced risk analysis is you ask the question, okay, the product's on the market now. Well, what's the risk of us removing the product? Mm-hmm. What's the health consequences there versus the health consequence? What's the risk of leaving it on the market? That's a balanced risk analysis. And if you were looking for good health outcomes, that's what you do. But Health Canada just takes the presumption that if it's not approved, it doesn't work, and it's dangerous.
Okay, so question on that. If we were to fast forward now, 8 years, 7 years, something like that, to 2003, when Health Canada really began to point their guns at us in 2000 after the first study popped out of the University of Calgary showing that the Empower Plus was over 3 times more effective than standard antidepressants, right? Without the side effects. And so as soon as that study came out, they came in, they shut down the double-blind placebo-controlled trial, blah, 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 you know, all that type of stuff. But then we get to 2003, where Health Canada is so irritated with the fact that my father isn't willing to just fold up and move to the States, and he continues to supply Canadians these vitamins and minerals that are helping them with their mental health and get them off medications, that now they come in and they shut things down. Well, they shut it off at the border, but they also, when we looked at the paperwork, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of that, because I was playing a different role in Truehope at the time and I was, you know, a fair bit younger. But my understanding of that paperwork is that Health Canada did in fact identify that there was going to be a crisis by removing the Empower Plus from the market. And as such, they were prepared for it. And they actually set up the 1-800 crisis.
No, that's not my understanding. They never did a balanced risk analysis showing that there would be harm if the product was removed. Now, they had a lot of evidence given to them. So when they were threatening, saying you have to stop selling this product, you know, Truehope got psychiatrists and doctors and people relying on the Empower Plus to write to Health Canada. So there's this, you know, file of letters from, let's just even ignore people pleading for their lives, from psychiatrists and doctors saying all the approved treatments don't work. I have, but my patient's alive and doing well on the Empower Plus. Do not restrict access to this product. So Health Canada had that information.
Mm-hmm.
But Health Canada doesn't care about that because it's not, this is the point is it's not about good health outcomes. I mean, David, the Canadian Mental Health Association, Ron Lajeunesse, the president of the Alberta branch, was holding press conferences every time somebody died because they couldn't get Empower Plus.
Right.
And that didn't shake them at all. They could care less about that. And then remember the 1-800 crisis line notes. I mean, it's such a funny, it's a funny and it's a sad story. So what happened was, and I know you know this, but your audience doesn't, is so there was so much, because so many people depended on Empower Plus, and it's manufactured in the United States and shipped across Canada. But the call center managing people, and because you can't just take it if you have a serious mental health, you've got to be managed by somebody who knows what's going on. That's in Canada, and it's a Canadian company, and so you know you got to be approved, even though you don't have. I mean, the United States perfectly legal, but you know in Canada, oh my gosh, we've got to pretend this is a big deal. So they start stopping shipments at the border, and they're getting so many calls to the minister's office that we know from internal emails that they do a PR thing where they say, well, you know, people are concerned about access to Empower Plus, and there's some angst out there. So we've set up a 1-800 crisis line with trained professionals. So you can call this 1-800 crisis line and deal with a trained professional, and, you know, they'll basically make it okay for you that you can't get this product that you rely on for your very life, or a family member relies on for their very life. So, but we know from internal emails from the minister's office, it had nothing to do with helping people. They were getting so many calls, they set up this crisis line just so that if you called the minister's office, as soon as you said Empower Plus or Truehope, they just hit a button and off you go to this crisis line. Well, before the trial started, it was clear that these trained professionals on this crisis line were taking notes of the calls because they're referred to in emails and other documents. So we had asked the Crown, the prosecuting office, will you disclose these notes to us? Because by law, they have to disclose anything relevant to us. And I mean, we're running a necessity defense. And they don't come. And at pretrial conferences, I'm bringing up, well, we don't have this. So first day of trial, and David, I know you were there, so you remember, you know, I bring up to the judge, you know, we don't have these documents. When the Crown, oh, we're looking for them. And second day, same thing. And then third day of trial, when I bring it up, the Crown says, well, the documents are undiscoverable. It was like a new word in the English language. So these documents are undiscoverable. Apparently, you know, they were in some deputy minister's office or something, and that person got transferred to another department. And Lord knows where the documents have gone. But after months and months of searching, we have concluded they're undiscoverable. Now, this is day 3. This is Wednesday morning in provincial court in Calgary, Alberta. So it's probably about 9:45 in the morning. And the judge goes ballistic and makes it very clear that if those documents aren't found soon, the trial's set for a couple of weeks, you know, so that the judge will entertain a motion to have the case dismissed because of, you know, lack of disclosure. Well, before that day ends, the day where the Crown explained to the court that these documents were undiscoverable, apparently these undiscoverable documents were discovered, and, you know, were being faxed from, you know, Ottawa to the Department of Justice in Edmonton. And I was assured that I would get a copy of them delivered to my hotel, you know, probably by about 10 o'clock at night. And I forget now how many pages they are, David. Like, it's at least a full binder.
It was over 1,000 calls, was my understanding. And I believe I remember something about a banker's box or whatever is what I recall. I just remember.
I don't know. I don't think it was a full banker's box, but it might be 800 pages or something that comes to mind. But just so your audience knows, we're talking a substantial number of documents. I'm in the middle of a trial, and I get, you know, another 800 pages or something. So I have to try to, you know, between, you know, in the evenings, and you're still adjusting. I have to try to find the time to start reading these. I couldn't. And it wasn't that I couldn't find the time or wasn't willing to stay up all late. The problem, David, was I'd start reading them, and then you'd have an emotional reaction and start crying. Because what these were is people basically calling in and begging for their lives. Mm-hmm. Like, these were the people, especially back then. I mean, the Truehope clientele, they were the people in and out of psych wards involuntarily committed, who all the approved treatments didn't work for, and now they have their lives back. And they're not willing to go back. And they're literally pleading for their lives. So, you know, so we're talking about Health Canada, again, restricting access to natural health products. Well, this is another example of a product, a single product that, you know, tens of thousands of Canadians are only alive, let alone internationally. You take down the Canadian company, the international people lose it also. And so, but Health Canada didn't care. So here they have these 1-800 crisis line notes. They know people are begging for their lives. They've got all the letters from psychiatrists and doctors saying, you can't do this. There's press conferences being held by the Canadian Mental Health Association every time somebody dies. And they don't relent because they don't care. And
no,
I remember the Health Canada inspector on the stand. So
I remember everybody aghast when the answer pulled past their lips.
I think it was Miss Jarvis. I could be wrong. It was either Miss Wheelock or Miss
Sandra Jarvis.
Sandra Jarvis. Okay. So Health Canada inspector on the stand, and I'm trying to set her up to force her to answer yes to a question I have, you know, down the road. And so I've got a whole bunch of setup questions that I'm expecting a yes for. Like, in my mind, these are safe yes questions to ask. And, you know, one of them was something like, you know, as a Health Canada inspector, you're there to protect their health. And I'm expecting a yes. I hadn't actually learned yet that our drug laws are not there for health purposes. They're there to protect intellectual property rights. Like, it's not obvious. You have to actually be working with the regulations for a long period of time before you reach that conclusion. And I mean, I'll just segue, you know, at the National Citizens Inquiry, there was a drug approval expert, Alan Castles from the University of Victoria, who testified. And, you know, he said under oath, oh yeah, no, the drug laws are to protect intellectual property rights. And I mean, I almost left the podium and went and gave him a hug, like, hey, you know, kindred spirit. But when you work with it long enough, you come to understand this. But So I ask, this Health Canada inspector, as Health Canada inspector, you're there to protect our health, and I'm expecting a yes. And she doesn't give me a yes. And so, I keep my poker face up there so the judge doesn't know I'm surprised. And I keep trying to circle around to get a yes. And she finally explains under oath the truth that no, Health Canada, and then, by extension, her as an inspector, they're not there to protect our health. They're there to enforce the Food and Drug Act and regulations. Well, of course they are. We have the Food and Drug Act and regulations, and they're the government body to enforce the Food and Drug Act and regulations. They're the police.
Mm-hmm.
They're not there to protect your health. I challenge anyone to read the Food and Drug Act and drug regulations and point out anywhere where it charges Health Canada with good health outcomes or protecting our health. It's not there. They're not even charged with acting in the public interest.
Exactly. To substantiate what you're saying here, I'm going to quickly share my screen and jog your memory as well, because there was not just Sandra Jarvis that took the stand during that trial.
Oh, I know. I still remember Miles well.
Okay, so here we go, and we actually have an excerpt of the transcript, and so I'm going to show that here just to show the viewers today the dangerous mindset of Health Canada, and that it has nothing to do with the health of Canadians. The way that I put it is they're looking out for the health of the bottom line of the pharmaceutical companies, plain and simple. Because when you look at all the facts, that seems to be the only thing that they're achieving. So I'm going to share the screen here, and we're going to go right to the bottom here. And this right here that I'm highlighting, can you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So the quotations is actually used.
Yeah. So this would be a question, and I would have asked him.
Yeah. So you're asking the question. So if you were sent a document showing that people were dying because of what Health Canada was doing, you would just ignore that because it's not a policy or directive? And Miles Brosu, Health Canada agent, one of the agents on the Truehope case, says yes. As in, he would literally ignore the fact that people are dying due to his actions because he's been instructed to do something else.
Yeah,
that's a little appalling to me. Not a little. I mean, that should be highlighting or setting off alarm bells. If every Canadian understood that, I think Health Canada would cease to exist, because there would be such an outcry saying, stop restricting our access to what we need to live and stop monopolizing the pharmaceutical industry against our will.
Yeah, and actually you bring up an important point, and I think your viewers need to understand what you're really saying is. So here we had a trial where there was just literally a mountain of evidence that Health Canada had before and during restricting the product, because there was a fairly long period of time where they were turning shipments away at the border. So before they start doing this, they have a lot of evidence, and from doctors and psychiatrists, saying this is going to lead to death. And we're talking about a vitamin and mineral supplement, and Health Canada is saying their crime is it's unapproved. So here we go again. But this is at a time where the whole market was unapproved. Like everything was, why are you singling out this product? Well, we know why, because it was challenging pharmaceutical profits. Could you imagine if Empower Plus became the mainstream treatment for bipolar disorder and major depressive disorder and anxiety?
Well,
it would cost the pharmaceutical companies billions and billions of dollars. Like it is mind-boggling the amount of money involved. So that can't be allowed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, but just back to the point is so before the product is restricted by Health Canada, there's any sane, rational person reading all of these letters from psychiatrists and doctors and people who depend on it for their lives or their family members. It's crystal clear, wait a second, people are going to die here. And then you start restricting access, and you actually get evidence that people are dying. And more evidence, my life's in danger here. And they don't relent. They just press on and on and on. They only changed their minds because of it came from political pressure. The Minister of Health was getting and the government was getting too much political pressure. And this was at a time some of the media was reporting the truth about what was happening, and that would never happen again. And embarrassing Health Canada.
I want to touch on that real quick, just to highlight that there was a shift that took place in 2010. When you say that, that there was some media that was actually covering it truthfully, my job at that particular time was actually doing video work for Truehope, and I'd catalog every media article that would come out on Truehope, or anything related to the dangers of antidepressants and whatnot, and I'd compile a video later on that. But anyways, in relation to that, there was something interesting. The only media outlet at that time that wasn't speaking the truth was CBC. Go figure. Crown-owned organization. It's like they lived in a entirely different world. What they were reporting was at odds with what every other media outlet was reporting in relation to what was taking place in Health Canada, or CBC just went quiet. So when I would log all of this video stuff up until 2010, everybody was saying good stuff about Empower Plus. Every time a study would come out, there'd be some news articles on it in relation to, autism and this and all sorts of stuff, right? People were becoming aware of it because the news was actually reporting it, except for CBC. Now, something happened at about 2010 where everything began to shift. We had these, groundbreaking double-blind placebo-controlled trial come out on Empire Plus. Crickets. No media outlets any longer after about 2010 were willing to report on that type of stuff. And that's when we saw the shift that by the time we get to 2016 and you're representing myself and my wife in court proceedings, that all of the media outlets were parroting a false narrative.
Oh, it was shameful. It was shameful. So, and people can read the court transcripts and compare with what the media of the day was. But I mean, the evidence inside the court, live would be even more compelling. And the media would be reporting on like it was pure fiction. Yep. Like it would have, or the opposite of the truth. Like it was so compelling that it was quite disheartening.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, I wanted to inject that part because you're talking about how the media is at that point in time during all this stuff when there's all this political pressure that's
and I was just trying to make the point. So here Health Canada created this impression that they're there to protect us. I mean, just, segue into a recent example, if we take these COVID-19 vaccines, for every vaccine that they've approved, Health Canada's approved, they have a separate webpage. So let's say let's take the Pfizer one. I always use Pfizer as an example because I think there's been more Pfizer shots than any other type of shot in Canada. If you go to their Health Canada webpage, and I don't even have to look, but it's been this way for years and it'll still be this way today. The first sentence at the top, which will be in bold to emphasize it. No, it won't be in bold when it says safe, effective, and high quality. So the sentence will go something like all vaccines approved of by Health Canada are proven to be safe, effective, and of the highest quality, and safe and effective and highest quality will be in bold. Well, that's interesting when you consider that under a regular drug approval process, even though the test is not well written, you do have to prove it's safe and you do have to prove it's effective. And then once you understand the safety profile and you understand the efficacy profile, then and only then can you do a cost-benefit analysis. Is this a good idea? Do the benefits outweigh the costs? You can't do a cost-benefit analysis without understanding the safety profile and the efficacy profile. Well, normally, that's the test. But for the COVID-19 vaccines, the government basically came out with a different test. So they exempted the COVID-19 vaccines from having to prove safety and having to prove efficacy. In fact, the words safety and efficacy aren't even mentioned in the test. So all you have to do is make an argument that the benefits outweigh the risks, having regard to the uncertainties concerning the benefits of risks and the urgent public health emergency presented by COVID-19. That's almost a direct quote. I can give you a direct quote if you want it. So the minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion, and I'll just stop there. if we'll use Pfizer as an example, if Pfizer had to prove something to Health Canada, it would read the minister has sufficient evidence to conclude. The minister is Health Canada. So if the test was meant that Pfizer had to prove anything that follows, it would read the minister has sufficient evidence to conclude. But it doesn't say that. It's tricky. It says the minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion. So not the minister's conclusion. Oh, it's very tricky. So so basically it means the minister has to have sufficient evidence to support the argument, because conclusion is really just where you arrive after you've been told something. So Pfizer has to have the minister, basically Pfizer has to make the argument. So the minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks, having regard to the uncertainties concerning the benefits and risks and the urgent public health emergency presented by COVID-19. The word safety isn't there. The word efficacy isn't there. So Pfizer doesn't have to prove their vaccine's safe. Pfizer doesn't have to prove their vaccine is effective. You can't even do it, even though there's risk-benefit language in there. Pfizer doesn't have to prove the benefits outweigh the risks if you read the test carefully. They just have to be able to make the argument the benefits outweigh the risks. And in the regular drug approval world, if there's any uncertainty over safety or efficacy, it's not approved. But right into this test are the words having regards to the uncertainty concerning the safety and efficacy, even though those things don't have to be proven. So the whole thing is a fraud when we know from affidavits filed in court proceedings that was the test Pfizer and other vaccines were approved under. So safety didn't have to be proven, efficacy didn't have to be proven, and they weren't proven.
Okay, so in relation to that, when somebody says, and I don't want to just get myopic on the COVID vaccines, but in relation to, there's this synonymous nature that's developed in people's minds that Health Canada has something to do with science, right? That there's really they're helping to streamline the science and the discoveries that are backed by science. When somebody says I'm with the science in relation to either COVID vaccines, or we've seen this so many times in relation to people taking psychiatric medications over the years, and they're just like, no, I'm sticking with what's scientifically backed. What would you say to that?
Well, and it just follows on the point I'm trying to make. Is so when Health Canada has at the top of the Pfizer vaccine page and every other COVID vaccine page, all vaccines approved of by Health Canada are proven to be safe, effective, in the highest quality. That's just pure marketing. That's just pure propaganda. It has nothing to do with truth. So Health Canada presents itself as, this arbiter of truth, or for our safety, but that's for marketing purposes. And so we've all got this now trust into Health Canada. So when the media is repeating and the government's repeating, well, follow the science, you have to understand, well, why are they saying that? Because first of all, science is all about debate. Science is about disagreement, and science is actually about discussing things. So what do you mean follow the science? Like, surely nobody's suggesting the science is settled on a vaccine that has been rushed through. Like no other, like surely if ever there's uncertainty, it's now. Like if you have two neurons going together and, oh wait, we're using a new technology we've never used on a large scale before.
Which by the way, made it so that these vaccines actually were not technically vaccines until they changed the definition of vaccines.
But now you're confusing things with the facts. And some ingredients, like, hadn't been used at all. And the quality control was atrocious. And everyone knew that from the European investigation, their regulatory body. And that would have been shared with the FDA and Health Canada. So, I mean, the quality is just atrocious. Like, this should not have been allowed on the market at all. But for you to suggest that the media and government to suggest that the science was settled, follow the science. Like if you don't recognize that as propaganda, I don't know what is. But now, can I just talk about the term anti-vax? Like, we have been subjugated to, messaging for so long that I'm actually shocked at how ingrained it is. And I'm like looking forward to when I discover things that I still believe are true or not true. Like I've kind of segued into, like, now in my mind, my understanding is about basically everything I've been taught. Well, I can't accept it as true. I just have to accept it's what I've been taught. So it's my paradigm that I'm operating under. But but I don't know if anything's true anymore. But it's interesting at the National Citizens Inquiry, and for those of you who don't know what it is basically a group of citizens got together and appointed 4 independent commissioners and marched them literally across Canada, where witnesses, were sworn in to tell the truth, questioned by lawyers, and then questions by commissioners, much like they would in a court setting. 325 witnesses. It was just this incredible experience. If you haven't watched it, go to their website and watch it. But I was one of the council calling witnesses. And one of the things I didn't expect is we would have like literally a witness on the stand who's like horribly vaccine injured and just basically telling how their life was destroyed, or a family member's life, they lost their life, or, totally disabled by a vaccine. And then they would volunteer, but I'm not an anti-vaxxer. And then we had another lady, I won't identify her, who was part of this pretty big, anti-government COVID action group, who's, explaining, all these things they did. But our group were not anti-vax. And it made so witness after witness. Yeah, the vaccine destroyed my life or my world or whatever, but I'm not anti-vax. It's so ingrained, like that term anti-vax, or, follow the science.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's so ingrained. And what people have to understand is these pejorative terms, anti-vax, conspiracy theorist, those are created to turn your mind off. Mm-hmm. Because we're herd animals, and the worst thing that can happen to us is to be ostracized socially. In fact, more, in my opinion, and this is based on National Citizens Inquiry testimony, more people who are afraid of taking the COVID vaccine who actually took it, I think took it because of social pressure, mm-hmm. rather than I'm going to lose my job, or I can't go to a hockey game pressure. Absolutely. Social pressure is so great. But the point I'm making is we're social animals, and our greatest fear is being ostracized. So when the government and the media deliberately insert a belief into us that you don't want to be labeled as an anti-vaxxer, like that's a quack, then as soon as anyone even starts going into a narrative that could be anti-vaccine, do you understand you actually turn your mind off? Your mind is closed. Mm-hmm. Because your mind can be opened or closed. Like we and you know when it's happening. If somebody starts saying something, kook, and yep. You're there politely listening to them, but you're not even listening. You're just like, oh gosh, like how long do I have to? Like you just want to exit that. Well, your mind's closed.
Yeah, I remember the first time it happened to me. Back in it was about 2004, and we got into this discussion. There was a group of friends, and there was Colette and I there, and we got on the vaccine topic. And as soon as I said anything oppositional, the one girl said, "Oh, you're one of those people," as if I'd already been. Now I'm ostracized. Now whatever I have to say has no credibility. I've actually been objectified, right? I'm now an object, right? Like one of those.
The irony is the joke's on them. So you see, they've now ostracized you. It's, the conditioning has worked. Anti-vax means equals kook, so you can't be a kook. But it's actually hurt them because now they've closed their minds. You see, if your mind isn't closed, and we have this experience daily, like we'll have conversations with people, but our mind's open, and we'll go, oh yeah, no, I heard what you said. And you may change your mind, or you may not change your mind. And when you change your mind, you actually do change your mind. You rework the neurons. And we've all had those experiences where we believed something to be true and then learned afterwards it isn't. And our mind actually gets rewired. It actually changes our mind. But we get to choose whether we're going to change our mind or not. It's actually a conscious thing. And we have that experience daily. But when the state has convinced you to close your mind, as soon as somebody goes, it actually hurts you, because now you will not listen to new evidence. and will not have the opportunity to decide whether you find it credible or not. Like, so that the irony, David, is the joke is on those people that then close their mind. It's their mind that's closed. If the government's closed your mind on a topic, you're now controlled on that topic.
Oh, you're enslaved.
You're enslaved in that topic. So in the area of vaccines, the government has basically closed the mind of the majority of the population, so they're controlled on that topic. Those people cannot see another narrative, even if they're going to reject it.
Even if the evidence is right in front of them.
They've lost the ability to actually make the decision because their mind is closed. And that you're a slave, you're captured when your mind is closed on any issue. So they've closed our mind on vaccines. They've closed our mind on anything that they label as a conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
And they've closed our mind to the possibility that the regulation body, Health Canada, is not there for our health.
Right.
Like, we've had so much propaganda. Like, it's really like 1984. A more appropriate term would be Death Canada. Like 1984, Ministry of Truth is the propaganda ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that, Health Canada, a more appropriate term would be Death Canada. You can't convince me. If we disabled Health Canada today and we went to Tunney's pasture and we demolished those buildings, like literally, set the demolition, and they didn't exist, I expect we'd have way better health outcomes.
Oh, 100%.
Than with Health Canada.
You wouldn't have a controlling body that's spewing propaganda. That to circle back on this again real quick, to touch on the belief that Health Canada is synonymous with science. The whole beginning of Truehope really began due to that particular type of issue, where my mother ended up getting on Prozac and SSRI medication, and 3 weeks later she ended up taking her own life. And it wouldn't be for another decade later that the science would actually emerge that was there all along. Health Canada approved that drug, and yet here was the actual real science showing that Prozac increases your risk of suicide by 2 times on average, but then in particular circumstances anywhere up to 8 to 12 times. And so, when we look at that, back in 1994, when my mother got on that medication, she probably thought it's safe and it's probably going to be effective because it's had to go through all of this type of stuff. It's been approved by Health Canada. At that time, I think it was the Health Protection Branch. But anyways, people they have a sense of security that's allotted to that, thinking the science has been covered. This is going to be good. It may not be the best for me, but it's going to deal with my particular situation, and the benefits outweigh the risks. When in reality, that science that showed that it was actually a dangerous medication wasn't part of that whole equation. And so Health Canada doesn't have really anything to do with science. In fact, they're suppressing science, because then we fast forward 10 years and now they're coming and shutting down studies on Truehope, preventing further evidence from coming out that's supporting that vitamins and minerals are the most effective corrective remedy for mental health conditions. Why? Because you're lacking in those nutrients, hence why you're not producing neurotransmitters and hormones in an abundant form so that you can actually feel good. It's simple. It's really simple science. But anyways, so I just wanted to circle back on that belief that got us into the whole COVID vaccine and all that Health Canada is not synonymous with science. And like you said, they're not an arbiter of truth, which truth is really...
I think people would be shocked. I mean, I know it's not the purpose of the show, but I mean, if we even just talked about the drug approval process, I mean, the whole thing is an absolute fraud on the Canadian public. Like, I mean, it's an absolute fraud. I mean, I remember it was actually on a different Truehope case, cross-examining a hired gun by Health Canada. And this gentleman basically ran a company that got psychiatric drugs through the drug approval process. And he starts complaining at how hard it is, because you have to give Health Canada 2, sizable double-blind clinical trials showing a statistical separation between the sugar pill and the drug. There's this, magic little formula that we use statistically, and then we pretend that means the drug works. It really is a pretend, but that's, it's an assumption that if there's enough statistical separation in a sizable double-blind clinical trial, that means the drug works. And, books are written on how you can structure these trials to get that statistical separation. But he's complaining, we got to get 2 of these to Health Canada. And out of the gate, my company, we run 8 on a new antidepressant. We just run 8 sizable double-blind clinical trials to get the 2. Okay? I mean, this is under oath. And the person's literally complaining, yeah, we got to run 8 to get the 2. And then we give the 2 to Health Canada. Now, you tell me that's not a fraud. Now,
Sure.
If you want a drug approval process for chemical drugs that actually were meant to protect the public and have good health outcomes, the pharmaceutical company doesn't get to design and run the clinical trial. They come to the regulatory body or some other public body set up for that purpose. They pay them money. A study design is published for public comment before the study is run, and then 2 separate groups are contracted to run the same study, and we'll see what the results are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that'll never happen because so few drugs would get through the drug approval process because they would fail to meet that magical statistical separation with the sugar pill. Well, now that I've said that, your audience will go, well, yeah, that's actually common sense. Have somebody without a financial interest design and publish the study design before it's done so people can comment on it, and then have 2 separate groups run the study and publish the results. Exactly. And then we'd actually have true results on a study that wasn't gained. So, and it's so simple to do, and Health Canada knows we'd have better outcomes if we did this. Like any drug approval expert or scientist would know, we're going to get more realistic data if we have somebody other than the person with a financial interest design the trial, and let's publish the trial design so anyone can comment on it, and then have somebody else run the trials that have no financial connection. It's not like they're going to get another referral from Pfizer if they give the results that Pfizer wants. Like, the whole thing's a conflict of interest. We're talking about public health. Mm-hmm. With the most dangerous risk factors facing Canadians or the modern Western world altogether is chemical pharmaceutical drugs. That's our largest risk factor. And we've designed our drug approval process in a way that's a total fraud and isn't designed for good health outcomes.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yep. So we're
totally off topic.
Canada does not have. we definitely digress, but we really established there that Health Canada does not have the health of Canadians at interest or within.
But it's not their job,
right?
They just, for marketing purposes, it's their decisions we stomach and actually support. I mean, do you know? Like, there in Ontario, there is a case, CG versus JH. It's a family law case where, during COVID, one of the parents wanted to get the child vaccinated and the other parent didn't. And so it ends up in family court. And at the trial court level, so the father wanted to get the child vaccinated, and he's basically, submitting Health Canada documents and public health type agency documents saying it's safe and effective. And the mother is presenting, evidence like from Dr. Malone and McCullough and people like that saying, no, there's a concern here. And the trial judge basically, said, well, I'm not going to just accept the government narrative. Like, I need more proof either way. So I don't know. And I'm not ordering the child to be vaccinated. Well, it goes to the Ontario Court of Appeal. And the Ontario Court of Appeal literally says that, courts can take judicial notice. And so this will be binding on, all Ontario family court judges. Well, the court can take judicial notice that if Health Canada has approved a vaccine, which, you can just segue any treatment, that's prima facie evidence that it's been proven to be safe and effective. Now, and so basically, there's a direction. I read that case as a direction to the lower courts that the person, the parent wanting vaccination, there's now a legal presumption, if it's been approved by Health Canada, that it's safe and effective. Mm-hmm. And it's on the other party then to bring evidence to disprove that legal presumption, which is quite fantastic when you think about it. Mm-hmm. And so the Ontario Court of Appeal, it's funny, like you and I, if we have a mistake on law, there's no excuse for us. I mean, we can go to jail, we can be successfully sued, whatever. Like, mistake of law is no defense. Well, here you got the Ontario Court of Appeal. Did they not know that these vaccines weren't approved under a test requiring safety and efficacy, and that wasn't proven? Like, it's like they don't know what happened. And then I wonder, well, can the other parent that doesn't want vaccine, like, there's legal presumption because Health Canada disapproved it, can they like show, well, yeah, but this country doesn't allow it. Their regulatory body says no, not for kids. This country doesn't allow it. Their regulatory body says no for kids. Oh, they used to let it for kids, but they backtracked now. Like, is that evidence going to be accepted like other countries? I mean, I don't know. But it's quite fantastic how we've so accepted this theme that Health Canada is there to protect our health. It's
not fantastic in a good way either.
No, I'm not meaning that. I'm just so shocked. But it's just most people don't ever look into this stuff.
Right.
And if you don't look into it, you have no understanding that it's like the Wizard of Oz. There's a curtain separating you from the truth. Mm-hmm. And the truth is so very different from what you see presented to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And may we all find ourselves shaking our own paradigm so that we can free ourselves from the shackle of delusional beliefs that have been instilled in us from the time that we were in our youth. If we're talking Health Canada right now, there's been a lot of rumblings over the last number of months in relation to what they're doing with the natural health industry now. Mm-hmm. And you've been really spearheading an action plan and identifying all of the issues, whereas I see it, a number of movements out there are really myopic, where they're looking at one particular issue to the exclusion of the others, and they're actually missing some of the most alarming elements of what Health Canada is currently doing and what we have on the horizon looking forward down the road if Health Canada is able to continue to proceed with what they're doing. Can you highlight what Health Canada is doing from the different angles, the different approaches? It seems like there's more than one battlefront here.
Okay, so first of all, I mean, we have to backtrack and give a little bit of historical context. So remember, I've already shared how we were unregulated. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had chemical drug regulations that just were totally inappropriate for natural products. And basically, by and large, we're left alone. So even, well, in the 80s, especially in the 80s, and then into the early 90s, like, natural products are just taken off. I mean, I think as a kid, I mean, I grew up in a city of 250,000. Like, was there a health food store in the 70s in that city? Like, I don't even remember. Like, but by the 80s, I mean, this is becoming really popular and things are happening. And now, both in the United States and in Canada, the regulatory bodies are getting concerned. And I don't mean concerned about our health. And so both in the US and Canada, the regulatory bodies start trying, well, they're not trying, they drive companies under, they drive products off the market, saying you have to comply with the chemical drug regulations, because the word drug is defined so broadly as to include anything used for a therapeutic purpose. Even though the drug regulations were intended for dangerous chemicals, they're saying, well, you have to comply. So both countries, there's a citizen rebellion, because people notice products are going off the market. They rely on them for their lives or health. They get excited. Now, the US, their consumer rebellion was a few years before ours. It was early 90s, and it was so large that Congress was actually forced politically to look into it. How should we regulate natural health products? They call them dietary supplements, but the same things. How should we regulate natural health products? And Congress actually concluded these products are so safe that they should be deemed by law to be safe. So, and we shouldn't treat them as drugs at all. We should put them in the food category. So they actually passed an act called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, where by law, natural health products are deemed as foods. They're classed as foods. And by law, they're deemed to be safe. There's actually a legal presumption that they're safe. And this is after Congress had a really hard look at, are these safe or are they not safe? So they actually put into their law, they're presumed by law to be safe. And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, their equivalent of Health Canada, is only supposed to take one off the market if they have, evidence that that specific product actually does pose a risk. Wow. Okay. Now, when you go to the United States then, so all their products are unapproved because you don't have to get approval. Do you, and I have to ask, do you feel unsafe when you go to a health food store? Do you feel unsafe if you went to a naturopathic doctor? Like, is there any problem with their products? Well, we're in the same boat. Unregulated. And we have our consumer rebellion. It's a few years later. Ours culminates in 1998 or 97. So the consumer rebellion is so large that the health minister, Alan Rock, publicly backs down the day before a lawsuit on cost recovery and says, I'm going to ask the Standing Committee of Health to have a really serious look. How should we regulate these products? And so the Standing Committee of Health, it's a committee in Parliament that's supposed to have expertise in health issues. And it's made up from MPs of all parties. And it holds the broadest consultation in Canadian history for any standing committee at the time. I don't know if that's been surpassed since. I doubt it. And they basically say Canadians want increased access. You do not regulate these as chemical drugs. That's totally inappropriate. And let's not pretend these are risky. Like, help me out here. And we all agree, let's not be fraudulent. Let's not adulterate. But we've got those protections, both in the Food and Drug Act. We don't need regulations for that. It's right in the Act. Fraud, we're also protected in our Criminal Code and Telecommunications Act. And you can be charged under the Criminal Code if you adulterate a product and hurt somebody. So we've got lots of legal protection there. That's not what we're talking about. So Health Canada didn't like those. They came out with 53 recommendations. They're still terrible recommendations. You ask MPs whose only tool is to pass laws, either acts or regulations, and they're going to say the solution's regulations. But they're saying don't treat them as drugs, and it has to be structured so Canadians have increased access. See, and if you overregulate, you have just decreased access, right? Well, Health Canada didn't like this. This report came out in 98. It took 6 years to get drug style regulations because they actually came up with this transition team. Well, how do we come up with a regulatory scheme to honor what the Standing Committee of Health said? Well, this transition team said the wrong thing. They didn't say chemical drug model. So Health Canada had to kind of ignore that and wait a little while and then appoint another transition team that then gave them what they wanted, which was, a recommendation for a chemical drug style model. So we got halfway into a chemical drug style model. So remember, in the United States, they're classed as foods. We're classed as drugs. In the United States, they're deemed by law to be safe. Well, we're deemed by law to be unsafe and ineffective. So in the United States, you don't have to get approval. You basically submit a letter to the FDA announcing that you're going to start selling this product, and here's the claim. And if they don't object, Bob's your uncle, and off you go. Whoa, but that's because they're foods. In Canada, we're drugs. So we're deemed to be unsafe. We're deemed to be ineffective. You can't sell anything for a therapeutic product that isn't approved. Oh, we're now approved, unapproved problem. So you have to apply for a license to get permission. And the license can be refused for any reason that has nothing to do with safety. And so we went halfway into the drug model. I say halfway because the carrot was the thing that allowed this to become tolerable to the industry was that we could use traditional use evidence to get through the efficacy hurdle. Now, having to prove safety has just added to the cost. And there's been some ridiculous things. My favorite is my favorite story is Nature's Sunshine. And, I don't want to alarm people because it's actually quite a scary story dealing with safety. But parsley that you can go into the produce section of any grocery store and buy and eat. Parsley actually has some therapeutic purposes, and Health Canada agrees with that. So Nature Sunshine had this brilliant idea. Well, why don't we help people by drying the parsley, grinding it up into a fine powder, and encapsulating it, and then selling it for a therapeutic purpose. It's easy to dose because of how we've put it into capsules where the exact amount. And they were able to convince Health Canada that parsley, has the therapeutic effect that it would be sold for, but they couldn't convince Health Canada that parsley was safe because, David, don't you can search all you want and you're not going to find any safety studies on parsley. So now it's a funny story, and they eventually embarrassed Health Canada into relenting and didn't have to come up with safety studies. But it adds to the cost because we actually, for every product on the shelf, when there's never been a death that we can point to in Canadian history caused by a natural health product, because these are ingredients in our food supply. And, in the case of vitamins and minerals, these are actually things we need to stay healthy now because our foods no longer have the vitamins and minerals because of our modern farming practices that they used to have. So safety isn't an issue, but we have to prove safety for every product, which just adds to the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to prove efficacy, but we can use traditional use evidence for efficacy. And I remember I was telling you about Jim Strauss, his family had been traditional healers for 4 centuries, but, a lot of those things, they've been used for thousands of years. And we can use that evidence to justify efficacy. And that allowed us to go halfway into the drug model and tolerate it. We've lost lots of products.
So in 2004,
the products have become less effective. They're dumbed down. And what I mean by that is to get a license, product after product, Health Canada said you have to drop this ingredient or you have to drop the levels to this amount. And I had manufacturers coming to me when we were doing this transition saying, we can only get a license for some of our best sellers, and they're best sellers because they're effective. But basically, we're having to dumb the products down so where they won't work, and we're refusing. We're not going to sell products that don't work. But not all manufacturers did that. So, if you didn't have a naturopathic doctor or somebody telling you got to go 8 times the label dosage amount for this to work, it's totally useless.
Well, it's exactly
like taking 1,000 IU of vitamin D a day, following the label claim in wintertime. Why are you even bothering? Even though you're in desperate need of vitamin D, you're not getting enough for it to be meaningful. That's part of the game. Mm-hmm. So, but we got ourselves halfway into the drug model. And remember, it took Health Canada 6 years because the first transition team wasn't going to support this. But they're like, the Chinese, they plan in, 100 years and 1,000 years. They got the goal. The goal is to get rid of these effective products and move us strictly into a chemical drug model. And their latest attempt to get us full into the chemical drug model is called the self-care framework. And they came out with this in 2017. And they said, here's the steps. It's non-negotiable. And what we're basically going to do is we're going to take natural health products and we're going to take the chemical over-the-counter drugs and we're going to harmonize so they're regulated exactly the same. So, and their rationale is look at somebody wants a pain reliever and they go to the drugstore and you got aspirin there and right beside it you have white willow bark. They're both pain relievers. Now, I'm deliberately picking that because aspirin's from white willow bark. Right. It's just one of the ingredients of white willow bark that treats pain. One. The most effective one, they bare isolated, and then they tweaked it. They tweaked it. So now it's a chemical that we've never had before that's similar to the naturally occurring one bound up with other things. including other ingredients that also mitigate pain. But we've got this, now we can patent it, and now we can get through this expensive new drug approval process. And yes, it actually treats pain. It works.
Yeah.
So even though we've tweaked it, it still works as a pain reliever. Oh, but it causes gastrointestinal bleeding, which causes a number of deaths each year and another of other, myriad of health issues short of death. White willow bark is actually probably more effective for pain relief, and it doesn't cause the gastrointestinal bleeding. And, and it's funny, the British government did a big study on this because so many people take, baby aspirin for cardiovascular issues, and they get, even though it's a low amount, they still have significant number of these gastrointestinal bleeding. When they did a study, comparing it with white willow bark, has the same therapeutic effect for the cardiovascular issues and no gastrointestinal bleeding. But these things are ignored because, doctors aren't told. Well, doctors aren't told about it.
Right.
So they're not going to recommend white willow bark over baby aspirin. And they have good reason to recommend baby aspirin in these cases. Like, I'm not faulting them for it. They just don't know. But the point is, Health Canada would say, well, you've got aspirin. It's strictly regulated as a chemical drug. And you got white willow bark, and it doesn't have the same strict regulations. And that is unfair to the consumer because they just assume that they both have the same strict high standards. So we need to harmonize white willow bark. We need to bring them up to the chemical drug standards of proof of safety and proof of efficacy. This is the argument they're using. And so this healthcare framework, what they're doing is right now they're negotiating down and relaxing the requirements for the chemical over-the-counter drugs, which, has groups like the pharmacists and stuff like that up in arms going, no, even though they're over the counter, these are like highly dangerous. And you can't relax. You should be increasing the regulatory burden, not relaxing them. But again, this isn't about good health outcomes. It's actually about streamlining for the chemical drugs, so it's easier for them to get in the market. So they're reducing that burden. And then the natural health products, they're going to increase to this new lower burden for chemical drugs, which is still going to be significantly higher than we have now, and that we can't comply with. And we're going to lose the right to use traditional use evidence for efficacy claims, except for the most minor conditions like maybe a topical skin cream. And that's actually an example. So how many products are going to survive this new regulatory regime when we lose the right to use traditional use evidence? Are we going to lose half? Are we going to lose 3/4? Like, I don't even know how many products their efficacy claim is based on traditional use evidence, but it's a large number. It's the thing that's allowed us to survive. And even how many monograph products are based on traditional use evidence. So that's just one aspect, which is going to be a bloodbath. Another aspect is cost recovery. So right now, most of Health Canada's budget comes from the fees they charge the chemical drug companies. So a chemical drug company, even just to have a building where they manufacture, they have to pay roughly like about $30,000 per building per year to manufacture. If they're going to label, they pay another fee. If they're going to warehouse, they pay a separate fee. And this can add up to 50 or 60 grand per building for the right yearly to manufacture or label or warehouse. They also, when they apply for a drug license, depending on the drug license fee, it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or it can be, $10,000 or $20,000 if it's just a simple single ingredient over the counter. It depends on the category, the complexity for the regulatory body. But natural health companies have never had to pay this. Now, remember, we shouldn't be in a drug model anyway. We weren't before, and we should be like the United States. But another SOP that allowed us, the industry, to agree to tolerate this was we weren't paying the fees and we could use traditional use evidence. Well, now they're saying we're going to have to pay the fees. And they're quite clear. The goal is 100% harmonization. So they've literally, published in the Canada Gazette, we're going to charge you the full fees. Now, David, for political reasons, and it hasn't happened yet, but I promise that it will. And then when it does, your audience can go, oh yeah, he told us this was going to happen. So they need to get us to accept cost recovery. And how you get us to accept cost recovery is you publish the notice you're going to impose at the full amount. By law, they have to have a consultation period where we can submit our comments. And then they're going to come out and say, we've listened to you. These fees we proposed are totally inappropriate. Well, we're going to impose like an eighth or a quarter of the fees we proposed. And the industry will go, oh, yeah, we can tolerate that. But the problem is now we've accepted cost recovery. And then next year or the year after that, when they increase 10% and 20% with their stated goal to have full harmonization, I can't get the public excited about, oh, well, they increased the fees 10% this year. Like, I'm sorry, but I can get the public excited about the concept of cost recovery. We can't impose it at all. So we can't accept this. And we've defeated it 3 times already. Like, this is the 4th time round that Health Canada is trying to impose cost recovery, and we can't accept it. But it's just another thing. And if cost recovery is imposed, we're going to lose a lot of products because a lot of them our margins are slim, and you'll know that, you're in the industry. And we're going to lose products and we're going to lose companies. Now, Health Canada says, well, we're going to be collecting a large sum of money with these fees. We're going to use every dime to hire more inspectors to, we're imposing stricter regulations on you. So there's going to be new things, like even when you apply for a product license, we're going to send an inspector to inspect your production facilities. Like, what? The burden on the company is not just having to pay these fees, but companies are going to have to hire more staff even just to comply with these new regulations. So we're going to lose companies over that. With these new inspectors, they're also going to go out into the marketplace to censor truthful health information. Now, that's not how Health Canada words it, but we're not talking about fraud. We've got protection against fraud, under the Criminal Code, under our Telecommunications Act, under our Food and Drug Act. We have 3 different agencies making sure that nobody lies, and that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about, and we can use Truehope as an example, is when you get a license, we're basically limited to structure function claims. So Empower Plus is going to be something like supports mental health and well-being or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Health Canada takes the position that you can only advertise the label claim. You can't say anything else.
Okay,
so
let's go to that real quick here. Real quick. I'm going to interject. Okay, so if we go to truehopecanada.com, as of about 2 months ago, this is what you're going to find when you go to click on the science tab. Science and research, used to be populated by 35 medical journal publications that you can go and peruse and see what Empower Plus would help you with. And this is what you're going to find. You're going to find a video of me to start off with talking about why you're seeing what you're seeing below. So this is basically your...
Right, so just stop. Before, where you have these lines through the writing, these would have been links to clinical studies in peer-reviewed research, and all of this research was funded by governments, none by Truehope, and some of these research pieces are published in blue-chip journals like Journal of Psychiatry, Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology. Am I right about that?
Exactly.
So we're talking about 35 published peer-reviewed research articles that Truehope, up until June 22nd, I'll talk about that in a second, you could access on their site.
Mm-hmm.
But Health Canada would say before and now, no, you can't do that, Truehope. You cannot share truthful government-funded research on your product from governments around the world. You can't share that with the Canadian public because we want to censor you and limit you to the label claim. Now, this is another part of the self-care framework, because remember, it's full harmonization with the chemical drug model, is before June 22nd, the maximum fine that a natural health product company was facing for defying Health Canada, in any violation of the Food and Drug Act or regulations was $5,000 an offense. So you guys knew you were breaking, at least in Health Canada's mind, the law.
No. Let's go down that road, because you have June 22nd. I think we probably published those videos, if I was to take a stab in the dark, I think about June 7th. We recorded those videos in the
Right,
last.
but you knew it was coming. And what was? Oh, you didn't know it was coming. Oh,
No.
they
So
were just after you.
yeah. So here's the point: is that what's interesting is, we see all this regulations that came into play January 2004, right? The NPN regulations, you have to get a license, all that. But they didn't do anything with it, right? In fact, there were still products, we were still selling products, whatever, through the PUED, that type of thing, importing them in, and you still can, but we were doing stuff that was outside of those regulations, and so were the whole industry, really. It wasn't until I didn't notice anything until about 2010, 11, 12 that actually products from the US that weren't NPN disappeared. So all of a sudden, I'm restricted as to my access of products that I'm using
Mhm.
in my home on a daily basis. And so now I'm having to order them and go and drive across the border and pick them up. Well, what's of interest is over the past number of months. So I think it was about October of last year, Health Canada reached out to us and said, hey, basically here's what's going on your website. You need to fix it. And we come back and fire back and say, what are you talking about? Like, this is just simplistic, truthful information. And so we went back and forth, bantered, and then finally we said, you know what? I guess let's comply, because the problem is that we have a license, and in order to have our product manufactured in Canada, we need a license. In order for us to distribute it in Canada, we need a license. And so basically, they could shut down in one fell swoop our whole ability to get these products out to people that need them. And so we were doing a risk assessment, a risk benefit assessment, and saying what's the best way to do this. And we said, well, you know what? Let's just show that it's being censored. So we did that, and then we started.
Okay, so you guys didn't know about Bill C-47.
Then
So
we heard
just so
about
your
Bill.
audience is aware. So remember, I said that Truehope was facing a $5,000 per offense fine. Well, they snuck into the budget bill amendments that, as of June 22nd, now natural health product companies, instead of facing a maximum $5,000 per offense fine. So using advertising as an example, let's say you ran an ad in a newspaper for a month that was an offense because you shared truthful health information that went beyond the label claim. Like, again, it has nothing to do with fraud. We're talking truthful health information. Well, you ran the ad for a month, so that's an offense. That's $5,000. But now, as of June 22nd, it is $5 million per day. Every single day you're in violation. And you're a company, no worries. The company's liable for these fines, but also every director, officer, and employee that in any way participates, or the word is acquiesces. What does that mean? Like, what's happening and you don't phone Health Canada, like, or do a hunger strike on the courthouse steps? Like, what does that mean? But you're personally liable for the $5 million per day fine. So they pierce the corporate veil, and everyone who in any way participates or acquiesces in the offense is also personally liable. So we've gone into the tyranny zone of penalties, because I don't know of a single natural health practitioner, naturopathic doctor, homeopathic doctor, or even the big natural health product companies that can withstand $5 million a day fines. Like Pfizer and all of this, these fines used to only apply to the chemical drug companies. That's not even pocket change for them. But it's destructive to any practitioner or natural health product company. So, David, we put fines into acts to basically make it painful so that you'll have, most people comply. But the purpose is for compliance. It's not to destroy. And the government's supposed to, okay, well, what's the minimal amount that's necessary to get, most people complying? You always have those outliers who won't comply. Like, that's just human nature. And we don't really, we can tolerate that. So what's the fines that, are necessary to get most people to comply? They're not meant to destroy. When you get to the point where fines would destroy, where you can't even have a dialogue, you won't even dare have a dialogue with the regulatory body, because you got to comply. Like, also on June 22nd, Health Canada now has the power to order any natural health product company to basically do anything. I mean, they could come to Truehope and say, oh, your olive leaf extract, I mean, you're losing money on it. But we don't care. We want you to run, you know, a $200 million double-blind clinical trial, and we're making this order. Well, every day you don't do that, it's a $5 million a day fine. Even if you say, no, we'll just pull it off the market, it doesn't matter. They now have the discretion to order you to do it anyway. We're in a brave new world where they can just basically take anyone down for any reason. And we know it's not about health outcomes. It's about full compliance with the Food and Drug Act and regulations. And these $5 million a day fines are timed because they're basically putting us into an environment where we're going to lose most of our products. And it's funny, I'll be on a webinar with practitioners, and every single one I will hear, you know, through the comments, oh yeah, well, we're just going to set up, you know, an underground pipeline of illegal products so that we can still practice, you know, as a naturopathic doctor, for example. And I'm thinking, yeah, sure you will. You would have when it was $5,000 in offense fines. But all that's going to happen is they're going to go after a couple of you groups, and they're going to totally destroy you with these $5 million fines, and then everyone else will stop.
Yeah, and further to that, I mean, there's a lot of talk about, yeah, go underground, go underground. Health Canada has thought this through, and they've laid, you know, they've played their chess pieces over the last 15 years on this, and done so in a very benign way that nobody saw what was going on. But they control the manufacturers. Who are we going to get to manufacture our product in Canada if we don't have a license? Because they've already cracked down on the manufacturers over the last few years. One manufacturer that we were working with got their backside handed to them and actually got shut down for a brief time, which, you know, do that for long enough, they're bankrupted. They got shut down, and then all of a sudden they're playing the role of Health Canada. They're becoming the policy enforcement agents, saying we can't take on anything else that that could be possibly, you know, compromised or whatever, or not perfectly in line with MPN regulations. They're basically becoming the police officers.
No, they've got us. Like they've totally got us in their crosshairs. So absolutely, it's quite frightening.
So if we're to sum it up, basically we've got this egregious enforcement powers that have been granted to Health Canada.
There's one other thing that I forgot to bring up.
Please.
And this is important. So what Health Canada's made clear is that when we fully transition into this self-care framework where we're regulated the same as the chemical over-the-counter drugs, that if you want to be licensed under this scheme, it's only for things that are truly over-the-counter, meaning, you know, you go to the drugstore and without talking to anyone, you like, I want a pain reliever or I'm constipated, you just grab, you know, you make your own decision. It's called self-care. But if it's a condition for which you would seek the advice of a medical practitioner, be that a medical doctor or a naturopath or homeopath or traditional Chinese practitioner or a nutritionist, we're not licensing under this scheme for anything that you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner. No, for those things, you've got to go through the new drug approval process, which you can't get through. So what's going to happen to our natural health practitioners, our naturopathic doctors and the like, when those products can no longer be licensed, the products that they use when people seek their advice, what's going to happen to those products? And if those products are gone, what's going to happen to those practitioners? And now, you know, we will find ourselves within a couple of years where we don't have the option, any option other than a chemical pharmaceutical model. And that's Health Canada's goal, and it's been their goal for, you know, the 30 years I've been involved.
We really saw this already in history. I mean, predating myself and yourself, but we saw where, you know, naturopathy was knocked off, homeopathy was knocked off in favor of Rockefeller medicine or petroleum-based medicine, which is, you know, what we call pharmaceutical medicine today. And we really saw how in America they had already monopolized, and the only survivors was actually chiropractors. They were the only, I guess, what you deem to be alternative. They're not alternative. I mean, it predates pharmaceutical medicine, but they were the only ones that were able to keep on going. And it hasn't been until, basically the last 40 years that we saw naturopathy starting to rise up and homeopathy starting to rise up. It was kind of resurrected. But, there was basically almost a whole generation that went without having access to that. And so we already see where they're looking at going, and that they're trying to really corral this in and control it and basically knock this whole industry right into oblivion so that it's not accessible.
And it's not just the federal government. I mean, you look at BC with their new bill that kind of gets all the health practitioners under one umbrella. I mean, you can't, if I understand that bill correctly, I mean, first of all, you personally have to, let's say say you need to be vaccinated to practice. I mean, they can dictate to you your medical decisions as a right to practice, but you also can't go against the government line, what their narrative is. So, I mean, we basically have the provinces also restricting, all practitioners, the doctors too, ironically, where they're funneled into this. You have to follow whatever the government line and practice directions are, which is really, you are not going to get good health outcomes when you have medical professionals who can no longer use their discretion to treat you how they, in their opinion, which is why you go to them, think is the best treatment course for you, where they're actually obligated, they'll lose their right to practice and be severely punished if they deviate from whatever the recommendation is from the government for your condition. I mean, this is truly alarming on so many. So we've been talking about the federal aspect. David, can I talk about, maybe plugging in with the NHPPA and some things that people can do?
Yeah, let's get to that. Let's just touch on one more thing real quick, and then let's finish off with that, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I'm enjoying the conversation. So
because you've laid out that this is really, really concerning, and what we're seeing within Canada right now. If you go to a health food store, you're likely going to find a petition that they're going to have you sign, as you're checking out. But most of the campaigns are focusing on cost recovery, saying that this cost recovery that they're going to put into place, in a couple of years from now, it's going to raise the cost of products, and basically, some products will disappear from it, and the other products will become, a little less affordable to you. And it's not that alarming. It's not that concerning, but yet there is an extreme, not risk, but we've got war on our doorstep right now.
This is the end game. This is the end game for natural health products. You're talking about the Canadian Health Food Association campaign, their SOS campaign. So yeah, and so the irony is, and I think that the Canadian Health Food Association is either controlled opposition, or is just so divided internally, or just so doesn't understand the issues, because we've seen that in the past, where they just don't have the ability internally to analyze things properly, or a combination of the above. But the irony is this SOS campaign, they're actually not asking for cost recovery to be stopped. If you look at their petition and other documents, they're asking for it to be mitigated. And you remember I talked earlier how we can't allow cost recovery to come in at all, because then they'll just keep, once we've lost, they've crossed that bridge, we're done. We can't go back across that bridge. They've already said, the goal is full harmonization. Mm-hmm. So what the Canadian Health Food Association will do when Health Canada comes out after the consultation period and says, oh, we're not going to impose full fees, we're going to impose an eighth of the fees we proposed. This Canadian Health Food Association will say, see, we were at the table, we negotiated them down, everything's fine, nothing to see here, citizen, move along.
And meanwhile, the frog just got placed in the pot, even though it's not hot yet.
Exactly. Oh yeah, no, it's the end. But so they're not asking for cost recovery to be stopped, which kind of begs the question, well, why? Like, you can go to any political strategist and they'll say what I said. Like, I can get the Canadian public upset about the concept of cost recovery, but I can't get, if it gets in and they increase the fees 10%, I can't get consumers writing letters and putting pressure on the government over that. Help me out. We're done. they're not asking for these $5 million a day fines and new powers to be repealed. They're not asking for the self-care framework to be stopped. Oh, well, let's just mitigate and soften how we implement it. What, you're okay with losing traditional use evidence? This is the end of the industry. Can you not see the end goal? Like, are you? But remember, the Canadian Health Food Association, they supported this halfway move into the drug model. I opposed it. Every other group opposed it. But they said, no, this is great. Now, remember, I don't know if it's still the case, but they used to get funded by Health Canada.
Well, yeah, it was discovered that they received, I believe it was $750,000 through an arm's length organization from Health Canada through the back door. And when we went public with that, if I'm recalling everything properly, I think that was 2008 that came out.
Around the Bill C-51 fight, because we have to talk about them sabotaging that campaign, but coming out with amend.
Yeah, exactly. So you alerted us to the issues there with Bill C-51 is my recollection, and as soon as we were alerted to it, we're like, what do we do? I remember being at Truehope till 4 a.m. in a collaborative meeting with everybody that had the ability to play a role in it, and we came up with the Stop C-51 campaign, and then all of a sudden we see the stuff being
and everyone adopted that branding. So it was the stop sign, red stop sign with Stop Bill C-51. Yeah. And that became the brand, because remember back then there was probably about 50 freedom groups that formed up, and that became the lead campaign. So you guys designed it, and that kind of became the branding. And then what the Canadian Health Food Association did was they came out with the same stop sign and said amend, not stop, amend.
And pushed so to the health food stores. And they actually created a lot of division where health food stores were angry with us because we were taking the wrong approach.
And that's happening again today with our campaign. So I actually had to write it. So I'm part of a group called the Natural Health Product Protection Association. The website's nhppa.org. Well, if you dig back, I had to write a discussion paper about their amend campaign, and it basically asked the question, like, CHFA, what part of Bill C-51 is okay? Like, why wouldn't you want to stop this whole thing? Like, so are you okay with the higher fines? Is that like, that's okay? It's the other parts you don't like? Like, you're okay with them basically having the powers to order natural health product companies to do anything and bankrupt them? And like, what part are you okay with? And so here we're reliving this, where this is the end. The self-care framework is the end. It's the end game. And they're saying, well, let's amend it. Let's soften it. It's okay. It's okay. Let's just soften it. Well, what part of it is okay? The whole thing's a train wreck. The whole thing's going to lead to loss of products. It's going to lead to death, and it's going to lead to suffering and dramatic price increases until we actually lose the whole industry. And I will have multivitamins on the shelf, with label amounts that are meaningless. Yeah. You still be able to get your vitamin D and vitamin C. For political reasons, they can't take that away.
But it will not be therapeutic. It will not be therapeutic. We've already played that game with them. We've had to fight tooth and nail just to have Empower Plus available in a form that is therapeutic. But I know there's people out there that are recommending off-label dosing just to make sure people are getting the benefits that they need, especially when they have mental health conditions. Mm-hmm. Now, in light of all of this going on, why, from your perspective, why do you think some of the natural health companies are not weighing in on these issues currently?
I think the biggest problem is lack of understanding. So, because we really don't have the word out yet as to what's really going on. And so if you don't understand the law and have the ability to analyze it in-house, and you're relying on the Canadian Health Food Association, which you're a member of, because they're the trade association that runs trade shows and the like, you just don't know. Like, you don't know. So I think a large part of it is you don't know. And then, they're running this campaign, meaning the Canadian Health Food Association, where if they were 100% successful on their campaign, we still lose all our products. Like, I call that a Trojan horse campaign. It's like, So you're diverting resources. Like people might send in one of their postcards or, sign their petition, and then they're not going to do our postcards and our petition. And we're actually saying you need to be more involved in that. No,
Mhm.
I've already done my thing. Well, you've supported a campaign where we still lose all our products. Like, so you see the danger there, right? So I just find it ironic. Like, I mean, they're not actually asking to stop a single thing. Let's just mitigate. And some areas they're not touching at all, like the traditional use evidence, loss of, or these $5 million day fines and new penalties. They're not going after that at all. Like, and what part of that is good for the industry? So, I mean, we'll just speculate for the reasons why, but it's frightening to me that I've been in this for 30 years and they've been on the wrong side of every issue every time, like 100% every time. Like where they're our biggest hurdle in trying to protect the Canadian public and the industry that the CHFA represents.
Yep.
Like we actually have to work around them to undo the damage that they do to protect their members. It's truly ironic, David, that and their members don't support us financially. So here, we're often working for free and busting our butts to protect people that are not. But it's the Canadian public that we're really concerned with. But I just find it ironic that that we have to work around the trade association that long ago used to do its job, but doesn't anymore.
So in relation to that, I think there's also another aspect to this, in that the natural health community has largely been hijacked over the last decade. So when I was, first starting to really do a lot of traveling, about a year into it is when the concerns started to rise. I'd go to these health food stores, I'd consult with the owners and whatnot, get our products in there. And there was this trend that was beginning. And what it was is that a lot of the companies were beginning to sell out to big pharma or big chemical.
Or just big groups. Like I think Nature Sunshine was bought by the Patterson Group in BC, for example, one that comes to mind. So, I mean, that's not a pharma company or a chemical company, but it's a big, commercial conglomerate that isn't going to be minded to, just wait a second, is this government action good for people's health or not? Like it won't even be on their radar. So, the industry's changed, David. Like when I when I got into this, so first of all, acting for Jim Strauss, and then, Truehope's another example, like where I bet you for the first 10 to 12 years, and like for most of my career, on average, half of my law practice has been dealing with natural health product companies running interference with Health Canada. I bet you for the first 12 years, almost 100% of my clients either solved a serious health condition that they had personally, or solved a serious health condition for a close family member, when all the approved chemical drugs didn't work. And that was so transformative that they got into the business of manufacturing to help other Canadians because it was so transformative. And then when Health Canada comes along and is trying to shut them down, like they're emotionally in a wreck. Like, no, I'm trying to help people, and they are helping people, and they understand the health risk is, Health Canada being successful in stopping them. But that's no longer the case. Like that's not the makeup. That used to be the majority of the manufacturers, and they would be passionate about natural health. And now we have a whole. I mean, some of the large players are owned by pharmaceutical companies.
Right. And I'm actually watching the sellout of stores as well, where a lot of the stores are selling out to big conglomerates, and they became very corporate, and the mission and the passion that they once had for natural health, and any semblance of standing for something, dissipates. It becomes cents and dollars. And so there's definitely a shift that's taking place that has largely compromised, I believe, the integrity of the natural health community, that is laying kind of the groundwork for really the dissemination of the natural health community. And the reason being is, with some of these companies that have bought up smaller natural health companies, if the natural health companies go to business, their other businesses are going to thrive more, right? Like the pharmaceutical arm is going to thrive more. So it's not like the whole suffers. It's just one finger is kind of cut off at while everything else benefits and flourishes. So there's a real issue there.
They also is, now that we've moved halfway into the chemical model, like people, I mean, those regulations first came in 2004. Now it took us at least a decade to become largely compliant. So, I mean, I think it's important for your viewers to understand, like, it's only very recently that, products were compliant. So, like, when the government's saying we need regulations at all, let alone stricter regulations, I mean, what are you talking about? Like, are they dangerous in the United States? No. And they weren't dangerous here before. Like, I arguably they're more dangerous now, and it's the nature of paradox. So, but the whole, we've got a whole generation of now manufacturers and distributors and stores that the norm has become this drug model. We're actually, like, it's news to them that, well, wait a second, this is like yesterday this happened. Like, yeah, you just started in the industry yesterday, but it used to be like way better. We had way better products. We had innovation, like the Strauss Art Drops and the Empower Plus. There's no way you could come out with those today. Mm-hmm. You'd be knocked off the market, too quickly now, and the stores wouldn't carry you.
Yep.
Whereas before they would. So we've, how many innovative life-saving products have we not had because of these new regulations? When, I mean, I could just list you product after product after product before that came in innovative. That's really, really had huge impacts, positive impacts. So, yeah, so the culture's changed that way too, is now we've got like a generation, we've got 2.5 generations in the industry. Well, the youngest generation, all they know is the chemical drug model. Like, to them, that's normal. So we even have that hurdle. Like, I can't publicly say deregulate. I have to say, well, let's harmonize with the United States and go back to the way we were. Because it's almost like anti-vax is, deregulate. Like, no politician can go there.
Right. We've been almost 20 years into it. 20 years in 6 months from now. Yep. That's.
Yeah. It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Yeah.
But like I say, for the first 10 years, we were largely, non-compliant because Health Canada couldn't comply, let alone the industry.
There was no enforcement. There was no enforcement action, and the enforcement action, the point of our having everything censored on our website is to illustrate, like with us bringing that up, that the enforcement action has actually been increasing over the last year from what we've seen. In fact, I'll share something real quickly here as well that showed up locally, right? This just happened this past March. Health Canada comes in and seizes these health products from a store basically in our backyard, which I wasn't aware of Health Canada actually engaging in those enforcement actions until fairly recent. And maybe it has been happening, but not that I'm aware of. So yeah, Health Canada comes in, they seize 17 products. I'm not sure if they actually find the company or not, but now what we're talking, because that was March of this year.
But now that store will not carry those products.
Yep.
And likely they're just products from the United States that the manufacturer has not bothered, because the market here is too small.
Yep.
To go through our hoops, so they're perfectly legal in the United States. And the store can't sell them, but you and I can import them. Like this is the joke, right?
Yeah, I can import 3 months of any one.
Yeah, you and I can import those 17 products. They're perfectly legal in the United States, but we need to pay inspectors to go and terrorize a store, because we can't have a Canadian company selling products that U.S. companies can sell to Canadians perfectly freely and legally.
Yeah,
that's clearly dangerous. I'm being facetious, because that store then will have the expertise to give you advice on how to use those products.
Yeah,
it's maddening.
It is. And now we're into a stage where, that happens in March. Now, if that happens post June, the story could be significantly different with Bill C-47 passing. That it's not just a matter of just seizure. That store could be put right out of business overnight, right?
Oh yeah, well, and that just means they will have total compliance.
Yep.
Like, it's funny, like, I don't even want to take on new clients now, because before, like, let me just use naturopathic doctors in this example. For whatever reason, Health Canada has convinced several naturopathic colleges and provinces to basically be their censorship arm.
Mm-hmm.
So Health Canada sends these censorship guidelines out, and I would be, so part of my practice has been running interference with, because naturopathic doctors, they advertise quite a bit, and if they don't advertise saying, hey, we've got this treatment for this, all truthful, but beyond the label claim, so Health Canada, oh, you can't do that. I mean, I could easily run interference for them. Where Health Canada, let's say they're telling you to shut down your website and you hired me. I mean, I could run interference for them, and the level, the quality of inspector has gone so far down that it's crazy. Like, I mean, I will have, them saying, well, you need to take this medical device off the market, because we'll look at, there's a somewhat similar device by some other manufacturer and they're making health claims, so this must be a medical device. Like, what? Like, what are you even talking about? Like, it's just stuff you would never see before, and like, you can't, no prosecutor would ever lay a charge because it's just bonehead stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And very easy to run interference, like literally, on average about 3 or 4 letters before they stop even writing again, because you just make them look silly in your long letters, like saying, oh, just wait, you're saying this, well, what, but the law is this and this and this, and but now I don't even want to take on a client, because when we're facing, let's say I get it wrong or Health Canada gets mad and charges them, well, $5,000 fine, but like $5 million a day, now they're going to be destroyed. Like, I have to say the risk is too high. Like, I don't want to take new clients, because you want to be meaningful and make a difference.
Right. And now you're gambling with so much more on the line.
Well, we're in the tyranny zone.
Yep.
So, so it's absolutely craziness.
Now that brings me to my last point before we get into the plan of action and what you're doing and how you're directing people to have meaningful action. When we're looking at, different stakeholders in the natural health community being silent, right? And what the potential motivating factors are, companies selling out, that type of thing, that they just don't have a vested interest. They don't actually stand for natural health per se. They're just, it's a lucrative business for the time being, maybe, or it's a sidearm project, whatever it is. What about, when we're talking about Bell C-47, we're talking about, higher risk. Are people remaining silent, you think, due to concerns around Health Canada being alerted to what they're doing and wanting to stay off the radar? Do you think that's a potential element as well?
Definitely. I don't know. I actually think the majority of companies don't have any idea that the fine structures just changed, and that Health Canada now has all these new powers over them. I think a lot of companies just have no idea because they haven't been educated about it. But I think part of it could be what you're suggesting. So, I know it's funny. There were some companies that were just so anti-Health Canada and so understood the long-term trajectory, that no longer support us, because they've switched over to the dark side, where no, we can survive this, and we just need to work with Health Canada and be cooperative. And the culture's so changed. It's sometimes I think I'm in an alternate reality with the position some of the companies are now taking that used to be really understanding. And the irony is this is now the end game. Right. This is what they had feared for years and years and years, and now they're not in the fight. Yep. It's quite spectacular, actually.
I guess the last statement I'd have in relation to that, to the viewers, is, ultimately your biggest vote is with your wallet, where you're spending your money. And when we're going through battles like this, not only taking the plan of action that Shawn's going to lay out, be mindful of who you're supporting in all of it. Be mindful of who owns the companies that you're purchasing from, that you're purchasing their products and that type of thing, because we are in treacherous territory right now. And it does appear that there's a major divide in the natural health industry. And that divide, unfortunately, if not reconciled, or it seems like the smaller voices at this point in time are the ones that are ringing truthful and actually getting the information out there, but the vast majority seem to be fairly silent on it. Be mindful of where your supplement companies, where they stand on these issues, and whether they're taking a proactive approach. Because if they're not, you might want to reconsider voting and supporting with your dollar somewhere else. So with that being said, Shawn, what are you doing with an HPPA? What's the plan of action? And, kind of where do we go from here?
Okay. So just so your viewers, I'll say the website again, the name in the website, so they can write it down, and hopefully you'll put it on you've got it underneath there anyway. So that's the website, nhppa.org. I will tell you that we are a federally incorporated nonprofit. We incorporated in 2008. And it's curious. So when Health Canada is moving, like Bill C-51 and stuff like that, we get funded. And then when nothing's happening, we get zero funding at all and go into hibernation, where we put out a discussion paper a year and maybe do a couple of interviews. But literally, as much hibernation as we can. Well, we're just resurrecting ourselves. So we've got some funding now, but not enough. And we need, I will ask people, please donate, please, but commit to donate monthly, because we need to hire a bunch more staff. I'll share with you some of the campaigns we have planned. But this is actually a golden opportunity. We actually should be truly thankful that Health Canada is trying to take our natural health products away. And somebody would go, what is he talking about? And why is he smiling? Why is he actually happy about this? Obviously, I want to protect our access to natural health products. And I believe we can. We're going to win this one. But what's different this time? And let me just back up and say the two largest consumer rebellions in my lifetime have been over natural health products. So 97, 98. And 2008 over Bill C-51, which actually were these $5 million fines and these new powers and penalties they just snuck in again. So over 70% of Canadians take these, and because they're so effective and in many cases save lives or just give a quality of life that you cannot have otherwise, people are passionate about this and they'll get mad. But we're further down the line of international harmonization. Like David, what's going on really is Canada has been negotiating with other Western nations for a long time to harmonize their drug regulation. And this softening up of the requirements for over-the-counter drugs is part of that. So this is part of international harmonization. This is part of, basically us giving our sovereignty away under the World Health Organization. I don't know if your viewers are aware of that, but the treaty that we can't call a treaty, which Canada is involved in with it as, a dirty shirt. And I won't go into the changes to the international health regulations and One Health, but you should have somebody on your show about that. But we're basically putting ourselves in a position where if the World Health Organization declares a pandemic, that we lose our sovereignty, we lose the right as a country to dictate how we are going to handle that pandemic. And the World Health Organization can step in and take over if we're not doing exactly what they want us to do. So we actually lose our jurisdiction. And this is all just part of that. And you see, so if the World Health Organization declares a pandemic and then dictates that everyone needs a vaccine, you're going to have vaccine hesitancy with a percentage of the population if there's other alternatives like natural health products to deal with. So this is part of moving us into a position where we're only having one model. Now this move, and we're going to counter this as part of our initiative. And the messaging is quite simple, and it's really irresistible because it's common sense. is the messaging for that campaign simply going to be, wait a second, do you mean to say Canada doesn't have the expertise to manage a pandemic? Because Canadians will go, that's crazy. Of course we have the expertise. Like, we just managed one. And the World Health Organization had just declared monkeypox as a pandemic. And Canada decided we didn't have to react to monkeypox. We didn't have to shut down. We didn't have to put any restrictions on the population. It just wasn't a big enough issue. So do you mean to say that the World Health Organization should have stepped in with monkeypox and dictated to us that we need to shut down, that we need to do this, that we need to do that? No, we actually have the expertise in Canada to make those decisions. And that doesn't mean we can't follow what the World Health Organization recommends. We did with COVID, but we didn't with monkeypox. We can still choose, but surely we don't have to give up our sovereignty. And that's just common sense. And that's going to be one of the planks of the things that we have to get out of this treaty that we can't call a treaty. But go to the nhppa.org site. Just bear in mind that within the next month, it's going to be completely different, because part of what we're doing, we have to just redo our site and make this easy. But we do have a campaign right now to put pressure on your MPs, where we, first of all, educate you about what's going on. We have a 2-page document that's, kind of the Reader's Digest, and we have a 35-page document written for the industry that really give you the meat and potatoes. We teach you how to meet with your MP, because we want you to meet with your MP. And we want you to phone your MP, and we want you to write letters, and we teach you how to do all of that. And we even have form letter and we're just going to have more and more and more. So actually watch, but please start supporting us financially, because this type of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. And, but David, we actually think it's time now, and why this is such a good thing is so we can get the natural health product community excited, and they're not even aware of wider freedom issues like this treaty that isn't a treaty. So we can introduce them to that issue. We're not going to introduce them to any other issue other than that, because it's connected. But we've got all these freedom groups that have formed because of the government overreach during COVID. And they're actually hungry to see, could we get Parliament responsive again? Because it's been a huge disappointment. And I actually think that this is an issue where we can get Parliament responsive again. And the freedom groups would be very concerned about this treaty that isn't a treaty with the World Health Organization. So the freedom groups will get involved in this. So we're actually going to be launching, so the NHPPA will be launching a bunch of campaigns, but also launching a campaign under a brand that isn't the NHPPA. It's just going to be called My Body, My Canada. So other groups can join that and run their own campaigns against these initiatives. You just have to agree on the end goals. You have to agree on an ethics statement, and you have to agree that we can correct your messaging if you're totally wrong, right? Because there's already messaging out there that's wrong. But we're also going to start a bigger initiative I want to share, because it's safer the more I speak about it. Because then it has to happen anyway, whether the current leadership's around or not. We're going to form local organizations in all 338 federal ridings. And we're going to get people to join all 3 major parties to control the nomination process, and to get their people to control the policy boards. You see, because we can win or lose an election, whatever that means, because I notice no difference between any of the major political parties when they're in power. Over nobody reigns Health Canada in. And once they're elected, they're controlled by the party whip. So, okay, well, we need to control the party whip then. Oh, that was easy, wasn't it? So we need to the citizen needs to get the political parties working for the citizen. And federally and provincially. So in those provinces that aren't already organizing provincially, and some are, well, we need to step in provincially and municipally and school board level. You don't like tranny story hour in your kindergarten class? Well, then take control over the school board. It's as simple as that. What's happened, David, is we're in this mess on many fronts because we were actually tricked into believing that we didn't have to take personal responsibility for the state of our institutions. And it was a trick. Because the reality is no, we're all personally responsible for the state of our country. We're personally responsible for how our politicians act at every level. We're personally responsible for our school board. We're personally responsible for our school curriculum, and we can go on and on and on. But we were tricked into believing we weren't personally responsible. And if we didn't feel like being involved because it's inconvenient, well, we just have to put up with a policy or two or a tax or something we didn't like. But, that's the cost of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the lie, David. Actually, we are personally responsible. We're going to be held to account for what we didn't do and what we do going forward. Mm-hmm. And now that we're learning, just wait a second, if we're not personally responsible, this is where we end up, and it's getting worse. And fortunately, people see it's bad, and they're wanting to take personal responsibility again. And so we just have to equip them to do that. And so we're going to do that. But can you see the resources that are going to be necessary for that project? We're not even trying to set up. We're going to set up a whole organization to counter the media, but that's got to be down the road because we don't have the resources and we have to focus on some other things first. But the mainstream media has become a weapon against us, where they're no longer objective and fairly report on two sides. But nobody's gone after them to peacefully hold them to account.
Yep.
Well, we have to do that. We have to basically have a whole structure in place to counter false narratives. And, and it can all be done peacefully. And it can all be done. Let me share with you. At the National Citizens Inquiry in Red Deer, one of the witnesses, her name was Regina. And she's a political refugee from Poland. She was involved in the solidarity movement there from the beginning, and actually ended up being sentenced to 3.5 years of prison by a military tribunal for handing out materials that went against the government narrative. And she shared, I don't think it came out on the stand, but when I was prepping her for the stand, she said something that has really gotten me thinking. For a couple of different reasons. But what she shared was that she said, we couldn't get traction. We couldn't get public support. We couldn't get the people on the street until the bread ran out. When the bread ran out, so, the strikes disrupted the economy enough that the bread ran out, and the mismanagement, which is what caused enough unrest to get that movement going. When the bread ran out, then and only then did people take to the streets. Well, let's not forget the people, that was a police state. It was a police state for decades and decades and decades. That was a peaceful revolution. The people of Poland, when they took to the streets, took control of their country again, peacefully. Well, David, they could have done that on day one of the police state. They could have done it in the first decade. They could have done it in the second decade. They could have done it in the third decade. They could have done it. They endured decades and decades and decades of police state, when at any moment they could have peacefully ended it. And we can peacefully now get our institutions working for us again and undo what has happened for us not taking personal responsibility. It's our fault. Mm-hmm. We were lulled into a lie. We see that isn't working, and we can take it back. And the beauty is Health Canada moving to take our natural health products is going to wake a whole bunch of people up to be taking personal responsibility again.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm excited. Is this has gone on far enough. As fatigued as some of the people in the freedom movement are, you're really just getting your second wind. God is moving in such amazing ways that we're going to be able to do this, and and so this is actually the time for your audience to understand we are in an information war. We were surprised, and whenever you're surprised, like you pick any war in history, when the one side is surprised, they're mowed over for years. Literally, it takes a couple of years for you to consolidate. I mean, Korean War, they literally, their backs were to the ocean. It was that dire. Churchill gets elected. Everyone's expecting him to surrender because it was dire. You couldn't win. And then you consolidate and you start pushing back, and you understand that you're going to win. And that's where we are. We're consolidating and starting. We're going to be pushing back very quickly. And that's why this is an exciting time. But you have to understand that you can't sit this one out. You're a soldier in an information war, and you don't have a job. You're a soldier. You might have to go and earn a living, but every spare minute of your time needs to be spent on this. And whether it's at the school board level, whether it's at the municipal level, whether it's provincial or federal or some other institution, maybe you're a professional and your professional organization has been taken over. And then whatever it is, whatever area God calls you to focus on, that is your full-time job as a soldier. You can no longer sit still because you are now being called.
Yeah, we need to rise up. What I'm getting from what you're saying there, especially in relation to the Polish example, is it's our nature as humans to be reactive rather than proactive. And unfortunately, they were reactive to a crisis when they could have been proactive, like you're saying. And from day one, they could have exited the police state. And what a blessing that would have been. And yet they didn't do it until it got bad enough that they had no choice but to react. So, the encouragement is get proactive. Even though you're not experiencing the pain of it right now, be proactive so that you can ensure that your children don't have to go through that pain, that you can avoid the pain that will come inevitably if nothing's done about it. And then further to that, I can't help but, take a look at this. And, for some audiences, this is going to be a very unpopular thought process. So I'm only going to plant the seed here without getting into too much detail. But I can't help but think that a lot of this is coming about due to the moral landscape that we're finding within the Western nations.
Well, I'm not afraid to say this is a spiritual war.
Oh, it's clearly a spiritual war. And what's happening, though, in my estimation, is that it's largely, what we're seeing is a product that has come about due to the moral landscape, that what we have tolerated, what we have allowed into our society. And I'm not saying to be, an intolerable bigot, but there are some things that when we allow it to grab a hold, is that there are unintended consequences that are inevitable. And so, if I was to go back to Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they all say it in one way or another, but the message is clear, that liberty can only be had amongst a virtuous people. And as soon as we deviate from virtue, as soon as we lose our core values, inevitably captivity will come about. Inevitably, tyranny will find its way in. And so, not only to be proactive people, but to make sure that our lives are of such that that they're acceptable, that we're living uprightly, that we're decent to our neighbors, that we are filled with integrity. Those are key elements to ensuring that we can still have a sense of liberty. If everybody lived that way, we wouldn't have tyranny. Nobody would be oppressing their neighbor, right? Nobody would be.
If we followed the second commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves, we would not be experiencing any of this.
Exactly. And
that includes taking responsibility for our institutions, taking personal responsibility. That's loving your neighbor.
Yep.
So, we've been basically taught to be sheep and not take any personal responsibility, and this is what happens. But when I say it's a spiritual war, it's funny. I wasn't serious about God at all pre-COVID, and then this starts happening. And very early on, I formed the opinion, and people can disagree with me, but I formed the opinion that we were basically being set up and lied to. And then just the depth of corruption and the depth of control and how organized this was. I mean, I was staring evil in the face.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm in Alberta, and how many children today are we jabbing with a product that we know is going to kill and harm and sterilize?
Yeah.
And there's no positive health justification. I actually call it murder. I say we're murdering. How many children did we murder in Alberta today?
Yeah.
And that's evil. Like,
yes.
And so if evil's real, then God's real. Like, and then I got real serious about Jesus very quickly. And it's funny, David. Like, even just any big public event, like the last Commonwealth Games. I mean, literally, they had people dressed up as slaves pulling out the golden bull of Baal. Like, I mean, that it was pure demon worship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the halftime show at the last
Super Bowl.
Like, I mean, you just pick, like, you will see Satanism everywhere. And, I'm sorry. I mean, our male world leaders that go to the Bohemian Grove and go through a ritual in front of the ancient Babylonian owl god Moloch, who, you sacrifice children to. How does that happen? Like, and I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. You cannot make this. If this was a novel and we were reading it 20 years ago, you just put the novel down. This guy's just being so unrealistic. I can't even read this novel because it's just too unbelievable.
Only a conspiracy theorist would read that novel.
Yeah, or an anti-vaxxer, and so there's something else going on here, and the reality is people have to understand that, like, it can sound crazy to you that it's a spiritual war. It's even funny that we can have this conversation. At the National Citizens Inquiry, I wasn't supposed to be counsel. I wasn't supposed to be in front of a camera. I was just the main organizer behind the scenes, and we had a whole bunch of counsel drop out. So I ended up being counsel starting at Toronto onwards. And I was supposed to give opening statements because I'm the kind of lead counsel there to moderate things. And on the second day that I had to do this in Toronto, I didn't have time to prepare. I'm running witnesses all day. I was the only counsel for day one in Toronto, and still had to prepare for witnesses the next day. But I actually just got this feeling, and you know what I'm talking about when I say you get a feeling. The Holy Spirit wanted me to share a parable in my opening as part of what I was to say. And I thought there'd be a huge backlash. Like, how can you have a secular inquiry and here you got counsel doing an opening statement and actually sharing a parable? But it was to talk about forgiveness, right? Because the problem is the government divided us into camps that didn't exist before, between vaxxed and unvaxxed. When really we had the exact same experience. Like, so really the camps were those who buy the government narrative and those who are skeptical of it. But we have to forgive ourselves. But thereafter, I mean, I just let the Holy Spirit give the openings. And we saw actually that it was positive. Like, people would tune in just for the openings and then tune out. And how does that happen in Canada, where we've been taught to hate God and we've been taught that God doesn't exist? And what I think is happening is God is just moving so much, David, that people understand, even if they can't put it into words, that something is seriously wrong, not just the details that they see in the news or in, whatever, but they understand there's something fundamentally wrong, and they're trying to figure out what it is. And what we saw with the National Citizen Inquiry is actually even just the message that God is there and that you're not alone. Like, we're not alone. I mean, the world's gone crazy, but we're the majority of people that understand that we need to get our institutions back. And we're not helpless anymore. And God's moving, and we can join alongside of that and get this back. And that's the message right now. is God is moving. You're not helpless. You're not alone. And we'll get this back on track. But he's calling you by name to get involved.
So may we rise up to our calling.
Well, that's the whole point. That's what he's saying. It's time for you to get off your butt and take responsibility for what's going on and change it. It's as simple as that. It's no longer okay. You're no longer allowed to sit and not be involved.
Exactly.
And you don't want to be. You don't want to miss this. This is too good.
No. Yeah, and what's beautiful about all that? I mean, naturally, a crisis brings revival, and that's what we've begun to see over the last 3 years. Is that many people went through crisis, which is interesting because for me, there was no crisis element for me and my family at all. But that's because of where we're at in life, that COVID largely didn't affect us. And previous to that, we'd already gone through our own battles, and the separation of friends and family had already happened anyways. So the COVID debacle didn't change anything there. But naturally, when we go through the crisis, we find a sense of revival within ourselves that brings us to understand that there's a higher purpose, that there's something far grander than just eking out an existence on this earth plane. And so let us rise up to that call. And regardless of the outcome, the beautiful thing that I've come to recognize is that when we rise up to our calling, is that we become somebody different, that we come to enjoy a lot more, that we become refined. And that's really, that refinement and that part of the journey is actually the most rewarding. The blessing is that now those you come in contact with, that you may have a greater capacity to bless them as well. And maybe, we'll be able to get this turned around. If we don't, though, by rising up to our calling, we ourselves still are the benefactors of standing and having those character building experiences that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So regardless of what you think the outcome may be, we have a duty to take that stand, and we are the ones that receive the benefit for doing so. So wherever, the audience here is sitting, just rise up, take a stand, and enjoy who you become as you start to speak out with courage and find who you truly were meant to be. I think that's there's a lot more complexities to it that you're going to go through during the process, but it is a beautiful experience, and become who you need to be for your children and your grandchildren, that they can look up and say, give honor to this individual for what they did while they lived on this earth. So I encourage everybody to go to nhppa.org. See the plan of action there that Shawn has laid out with his team. Support him financially. Become a part of that. Get involved with your MPs. And let's see what difference we can make here and now. And we will just continue to get the word out there and make sure that, if this particular plan doesn't work, that plan B comes into place, or plan C, and we just continue on, and not to throw in the towel prematurely, because this is a very, very crucial aspect of what we're going through today. And it makes me think of the famous words of Patrick Henry: give me liberty or give me death. And the reason why I say that is nobody wants to live in where this will go if we do nothing. So let's take a stand for liberty today. And that begins here. And then take it outward. All right. Thank you for coming on again, Shawn. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, David. Always a pleasure.
Yep. I'm glad that, we kind of digressed at the end there to something that we had never planned on talking about. And I'm glad that we did, because it's actually touching on the most important elements of all of this. And so I just hope that our audience gets the message, and that if they haven't yet had those experiences that they're starting to, come in under God, that they begin to do so, because that's when life becomes the most rewarding, regardless of the storms that rage around us. All right. Well, until next time, we'll have you on again sometime, Shawn. Thank you again. It was a real honor.
when we launch some of these initiatives. So and also I forgot to say, when you go to the NHPPA site, there's a subscribe tab. Give us your email address, because then when we announce initiatives, we can email you, and also, you know, subscribe to our social media channels, so that we have a way of tying you into the different initiatives that we're putting in motion.
Awesome. Go visit that site. Do so before you forget. Make it a plan of action and support as you can, so that we can continue to get the word out there, and that that Shawn can continue to make sure that there are some strong plans of action that can be taken to revert this, because it's not a matter of this is a threat that if they get stuff through, they've already got it through. The threat's at the doorstep. The breach is already in the wall. We need to fix that breach and get the enemy out of the inner sanctum. And so action needs to take place. Don't delay until the point that you no longer have access to the supplements that you love to take or need to take. Take action today. Thank you very much for watching. And yes, again, Shawn.
Well, I would say, like, you know, in Canada, like, it's going to be another year and a half, but if things are tightening up at the border, so if you rely on products from the United States that you cannot get in Canada, like there's one, now is the time to stock up. I mean, this is like my third order of a product you cannot get anywhere in Canada. So if you rely on a product that you can't get in Canada, you stock up now.
Yes, an immediate plan B action, stock up. Yeah.
And plan on, like, paying attention, because, like I say, we're just getting phased in now. But, you know, pay attention for when we're going to start losing them in Canada, so that you can stock up. I mean, you want to put that off as long as possible. Sure, you've got the shelf life, but the danger is if you're late to the party, you're not getting it, because everyone will get the same idea at the same time, right? It's kind of like you got to be the guy the day before the bank run.
Yep.
So yeah, but you do have to start watching now.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you again, Shawn. Blessings to everybody that's watching, and may we all rise up to our calling and make some serious change in this country. Blessings to you all.